have a confession to make. The night my husband's mother seated his mistress beside him at her 65th birthday party, I didn't slap her. I didn't scream at my husband. I didn't throw a glass across the dining room. I didn't ask that woman how long she'd been sleeping with him. I didn't even cry. I simply picked up my purse and walked away. But here's the part I've never told anyone. I didn't walk away because I had suddenly stopped loving my husband. I walked away because, sitting at that table, I finally realized something that frightened me more than the affair itself. I had been lonely in my marriage for years, and somehow, I had convinced myself that loneliness was just another name for commitment. Maybe you've experienced something like that. Maybe you've stayed in a relationship because you remembered how beautiful it used to be. Maybe you've forgiven the same person so many times that forgiveness became automatic. Maybe you've looked at an old photograph and thought, that's the person I married, only to look at the person sleeping beside you and wonder when the two of you became strangers. If you've ever loved someone so deeply that you started ignoring the ways they were hurting you, then I want you to stay with me. Because what happened at that birthday party wasn't the beginning of my marriage falling apart. It was simply the first time I stopped pretending it hadn't already happened. And before I tell you what happened at that table, I need to confess something else. For 12 years, I had been telling myself a beautiful lie. I believed that if I loved my husband enough, if I was patient enough, if I understood his moods, if I remembered his favorite meals, if I kept his shirts pressed, if I made our home comfortable, if I didn't complain about the nights he came home late, if I didn't ask too many questions, then eventually he would remember how much he loved me. I thought love was something you could maintain alone if you were willing to work hard enough. I was wrong. My name is Claire Bennett, and for 12 years I was married to a man named Daniel. There was a time when Daniel was the safest person I knew. Before the silence, before the secrets, before Vanessa, before the birthday party that changed everything. There was a time when I could tell what Daniel was feeling simply by listening to the way he closed a door. When he was angry, he shut it too hard. When he was tired, he forgot to close it completely. When he was happy, he hummed without realizing it. And when something was troubling him, he became strangely careful. He would place his keys gently on the counter, close the refrigerator without making a sound, answer every question with a calm little, "I'm fine." That was how I knew something was wrong on the morning of his mother's 65th birthday. He was being careful. And I noticed. Of course I noticed. I always noticed. That had been one of my greatest strengths as a wife, and eventually, one of my greatest weaknesses. That morning, I stood in our bedroom holding one of Daniel's blue dress shirts. It was freshly ironed. The collar was stiff. The sleeves were perfectly smooth. I ran my hand over the fabric and smiled faintly. I had been doing this for years. Not because Daniel couldn't iron his own shirts. Not because he couldn't button them. Not because he needed me to. I did it because, 12 years earlier, he had told me something that had stayed with me. We had been living in our first apartment then. The apartment was tiny. The kitchen barely had enough room for 2 people to stand in at the same time. The heater broke every winter. The living room couch had come from a neighbor who was moving away. And somehow, we were happy. One Saturday morning, I had folded his clothes and placed them neatly in the closet. Daniel had watched me from the doorway. "You know what I like about you?" he'd asked. I remember laughing. "Only one thing?" He smiled. "You make ordinary things feel important." I rolled my eyes. "That's your compliment?" "Yes." "That's terrible." He walked over and kissed my forehead. "No, it's not." Then he looked at the neatly arranged clothes. "You make this feel like home." I didn't know then how much those words would mean to me later, so I kept doing little things. I remembered his coffee order. I packed his lunch when he had early meetings. I learned how he liked his steak. I knew which side of the bed he preferred. I knew that when he had a headache, he wanted the bedroom dark. I knew that when he was worried, he became quiet. And when he was hurting, he usually pretended he wasn't. I thought knowing those things meant I knew him. Maybe it did. Maybe that was part of the problem. Because when you know someone for long enough, you can become so familiar with their patterns that you start filling in the blanks for them. You stop asking. You assume. You remember who they were. And sometimes, you fail to notice who they have become. I buttoned the shirt. One button. Then another. Then I stopped. My fingers rested against the 3rd button. I suddenly couldn't remember the last time Daniel had thanked me for doing this. I stood there for several seconds. It was such a small thought. Almost ridiculous. But it stayed. When had I stopped expecting him to notice? I heard footsteps in the hallway. "Claire?" Daniel's voice. "Yes?" "Have you seen my cufflinks?" "In the top drawer." "Which side?" "The left." A pause. Then I heard the drawer open. Found them. His footsteps moved away. I looked down at the shirt in my hands. And for the first time that morning, I wondered whether I was preparing clothes for my husband, or preparing myself for another day of pretending everything was fine. I wish I could tell you I understood the significance of that moment. I didn't. Not yet. Because sometimes the heart knows something long before the mind is willing to admit it. And that evening, at my mother-in-law's birthday party, my heart would finally run out of excuses. But before I tell you what happened when I walked into that dining room, I need you to understand one thing. Daniel wasn't always the man who betrayed me. That's what made leaving so difficult. He was also the man who once sat beside me for an entire hour when I was crying. The man who drove through a snowstorm because I had forgotten my medication. The man who held my hand at my father's funeral. The man who used to leave little notes inside my lunch bag. The man who once told me, "I'll never make you feel like you're facing life alone." And perhaps that's why I stayed as long as I did. Because when someone hurts you, you don't only remember the hurt. You remember the person they used to be. You remember the laughter, the promises, the first kiss, the first apartment, the first Christmas, the night you danced barefoot in the kitchen. You remember everything that makes leaving feel like destroying something sacred. But memories can be dangerous. Not because they are false, but because they are incomplete. They show you what happened. They don't always show you what has changed. So that evening, when I walked into Evelyn Bennett's 65th birthday celebration, I wasn't expecting to discover my husband's mistress. I was expecting cake, family, laughter, photographs, maybe a few embarrassing stories about Daniel's childhood. I was expecting an ordinary family celebration. Instead, I walked into a room that would force me to question 12 years of my life. And when I saw the woman sitting beside my husband, I recognized her, not because I knew her personally, but because I had seen her name before, on Daniel's phone, months earlier. A message, a name, a simple question I had asked, and an answer I had believed. "She's just a client." I had nodded. I had smiled. I had gone back to washing the dishes. That was the thing about trust. When you trusted someone, you didn't interrogate every sentence. You gave them the benefit of the doubt. You believed the person you loved would never deliberately make you feel foolish. So when I walked into that dining room and saw Vanessa sitting beside Daniel, I didn't immediately think, "He's cheating on me." My first thought was much simpler. Why is she here? Then Evelyn smiled at me. She lifted her hand toward the empty chair beside Daniel. "Claire, darling, come sit down." I looked at the chair, then at Vanessa, then at Daniel, and in that single moment, every unanswered question I had pushed into the back of my mind came rushing forward. Daniel looked at me. His face lost its color. Vanessa lowered her eyes. And Evelyn looked almost proud of the arrangement. I could hear conversations continuing around me. Forks touching plates. Glasses clinking. Someone laughing near the other end of the table. But all I could hear was my own heartbeat. I remember thinking, so this is how I'm going to find out. Not privately, not gently. Not from my husband, at his mother's birthday, in front of everyone, with the woman he had been seeing sitting in the chair, meant for me. And that's when I made the quietest decision of my life. I picked up my purse, I looked at Daniel, and I said only 4 words. "I'm going home, Daniel." He stood immediately. "Claire, wait." But I was already walking. And for the first time in 12 years, I didn't turn around to see if he was following me. If you were sitting at that table, what would you have done? Would you have confronted him in front of everyone? Would you have demanded answers? Or would you have done exactly what I did? Tell me in the comments. And if stories about love, betrayal, healing, and the choices that quietly change our lives speak to you, subscribe to Love Stories by Mr. Johnson. Because sometimes the most powerful endings don't begin with shouting. Sometimes they begin with a woman quietly picking up her purse and walking away. The first thing I noticed when I got home was how quiet the house was. Not peaceful, quiet. There is a difference. Peaceful silence feels like a blanket. This kind of silence feels like someone has taken the furniture out of a room and left the walls standing. I closed the front door behind me and stood there with my purse still hanging from my shoulder. For a moment, I didn't move. I could still hear Evelyn's voice. "Claire, darling, come sit down." I could still see Vanessa's face. I could still see Daniel standing halfway out of his chair. And I could still feel the weight of every eye at that table. But strangely, I wasn't thinking about Vanessa. Not really. I was thinking about the chair. That empty chair beside Daniel. The one I was supposed to occupy. The one his mother had pointed toward, as if nothing unusual had happened. As if I hadn't just walked into a room and discovered that my husband had been living 2 different lives. I slowly took off my shoes. One, then the other. I placed them beside the door. That was when I noticed my hands were shaking. I looked at them. "Stop," I whispered. I wasn't sure whether I was talking to my hands or myself. I walked into the kitchen and filled a glass with water. I drank half of it. Then I stood there holding the glass. I didn't cry. That surprised me. I had always imagined that if Daniel ever cheated on me, I would fall apart. I thought there would be screaming, tears, questions, maybe even rage. Instead, I felt something much more unsettling. Clarity. It was almost as if someone had taken a foggy window and wiped it clean. Suddenly, things I had spent months explaining away looked different. The late nights. The password change on his phone. The meetings that somehow appeared on weekends. The sudden interest in a particular restaurant across town. The way he started dressing differently. The way he began carrying his phone everywhere, even into the bathroom. I had noticed all of it. I had simply refused to connect the dots. Because sometimes the truth doesn't arrive when you discover something. Sometimes it arrives when you finally allow yourself to remember. I put the glass down. Then I walked upstairs. Our bedroom door was open. Daniel's side of the closet was still exactly the way I'd left it that morning. The blue shirt was gone. He had worn it to his mother's birthday. I stared at the empty space where it had been. And suddenly, I remembered something. The first time I had ever seen Daniel wear that shirt. It had been years ago. We were still dating. He had taken me to a small restaurant downtown because he wanted to introduce me to one of his closest friends. He had been nervous. I had teased him about it. "You've checked your hair 6 times. 7. Why?" He had looked at me through the mirror. "Because I want you to like the way I look." I had laughed. "I already like the way you look." "That's not the point." "What is the point?" He had turned toward me. "I want to feel proud when I walk into a room with you." I remembered that sentence so clearly that it almost hurt. Back then, I thought being chosen meant being seen. Now I understood that being chosen also meant being respected when you weren't in the room. I sat on the edge of the bed. My eyes fell on our wedding photograph. It was still sitting on the dresser. I picked it up. Daniel was smiling. I was smiling. We looked happy. And we had been happy. That was the part people never understood about betrayal. They assumed the entire relationship had to be a lie. It didn't. Some of it had been beautiful. Some of it had been real. Some of it had been deeply loving. And some of it had become something neither of us knew how to repair. I placed the photograph back down. My phone buzzed. I looked at the screen. Daniel. I let it ring. It stopped. A few seconds later, a message appeared. "Please don't make any decisions tonight." I stared at the words. Then another message arrived. "I need to explain." I typed, "You had 12 years to explain." I stared at it, then deleted it. I typed again. "I'm tired." Deleted. Finally, I turned the phone off. I didn't want an explanation. Not tonight. Tonight, I needed to hear my own thoughts. I changed clothes and climbed into bed. Daniel's side remained empty. I stared at the ceiling. And for the first time, I allowed myself to ask the question I had been avoiding. When did we become this? Not when did he meet Vanessa. Not when did the affair begin. When did we begin disappearing? Because affairs don't always begin in bedrooms. Sometimes they begin in conversations that stop happening. Sometimes they begin with a question you don't ask because you're too tired. Sometimes they begin when 2 people sit across from each other at dinner and realize they have nothing left to say. That didn't excuse Daniel. I knew that. But I also knew something else. If I wanted to understand what had happened to my marriage, I couldn't pretend the last 8 months existed in isolation. There had been a road leading there, and I had been walking on it too. I just hadn't realized where it was going. I met Daniel 12 years earlier at a coffee shop. I still remembered the first thing he said to me. "You look like you're having a terrible day." I had looked up from my laptop. "That's because I am." He had smiled. "Fair enough." Then he walked away. That was it. No pickup line. No attempt to impress me. No request for my number. Just an observation. 2 weeks later, I saw him again. Same coffee shop. Same corner table. He was reading a book. I was working. He looked up. "Better day?" I smiled. "Much better." "Good." And he went back to his book. I don't know why that stayed with me. Maybe because he didn't demand anything from me. He simply noticed. Over the next few weeks, we kept seeing each other. Sometimes we talked. Sometimes we didn't. Eventually, one evening, he asked if he could sit with me. I said yes. We talked for 3 hours. About work, family, music, childhood, fear. He told me about his father, his relationship with his mother, his fear of becoming emotionally distant like his father had been. I told him about my own family, my insecurities, the things I rarely admitted to anyone. He listened, not the way people listen while waiting for their turn to speak. He actually listened. That was what drew me to him. Not his smile, not his appearance, not even the fact that he made me laugh. It was the relief I felt around him. The relief of not having to explain every emotion. The relief of feeling understood. Looking back, I think that was why the betrayal hurt so much. Daniel hadn't just been my husband. He had been the person I trusted with the parts of myself I didn't show the world. When that trust broke, it wasn't only the marriage that felt damaged. It was my understanding of my own judgment. I began wondering whether I had misunderstood him all those years. Whether every beautiful memory had been evidence of something I had imagined. But that wasn't fair either. A person can love you sincerely and still hurt you. A person can be good to you for years and later make a terrible choice. Human beings aren't photographs. They change. They contradict themselves. They disappoint each other. Sometimes they grow together. Sometimes they grow apart. The mistake is believing that because someone once loved you well, they are incapable of hurting you. I had believed that. And perhaps Daniel had believed something too. That because our marriage had survived difficult years before, it would survive anything. Maybe both of us had become careless with something we once treated as fragile. At 1:47 in the morning, I heard the front door open. Daniel was home. I heard his footsteps downstairs. He didn't call my name. He didn't come upstairs immediately. For several minutes, there was nothing. Then, I heard the refrigerator open. The sound of a glass being placed on the counter. A chair scraping against the kitchen floor. I lay still. Part of me wanted him to come upstairs. Another part prayed he wouldn't. Finally, footsteps came up the stairs. They stopped outside the bedroom. The door opened slowly. I kept my eyes closed. Daniel stood there. I could feel him looking at me. "Claire?" I didn't respond. He came into the room. "I know you're awake." I opened my eyes. He looked exhausted. His tie was gone. His shirt was wrinkled. He looked older than he had that morning. "What do you want?" I asked. He swallowed. "I want to explain." "I don't want an explanation." "You deserve one." I deserved honesty before tonight. He flinched. I hated that I noticed. I always noticed. He sat on the chair near the window. "I didn't know how to tell you." "Tell me what?" "That I had become unhappy." I looked at him. "How long?" He looked down. "I don't know." "Try." He took a breath. "Maybe 2 years." 2 years. I sat up. 2 years? I didn't know what to do. "You could have talked to me." I tried. "No, Daniel." My voice remained quiet. "You thought about talking to me." He stared at me. "Those aren't the same thing." He looked away. I continued. "You didn't try. You became quiet. You withdrew. You started spending more time away from home. And when I asked what was wrong, you told me I was imagining things." "I know. You made me question my own instincts." "I know. You knew I was worried." "I know. And you still kept doing it." He closed his eyes. "Yes." The honesty of that one word hurt more than every excuse could have. I looked toward the window. "Did you love her?" Silence. I waited. "I don't know." I nodded. That was the answer I had feared. Not because it meant he loved Vanessa, but because it meant there was a part of him he had given to someone else, while still coming home to me. "How did it start?" He rubbed his hands together. "Work." "Of course. I know how it sounds. It sounds like every affair story I've ever heard." He looked at me. "We talked." "About?" "Things." I almost smiled. "Things?" "Life, work, my mother, the marriage." My chest tightened. "You talked to her about our marriage?" "Not at first. But eventually." "Yes." "And what did you tell her?" He hesitated. "That I felt alone." I stared at him. Then I laughed once. It wasn't a happy laugh. "That's unbelievable." "Claire." "No." I shook my head. "You were lonely, so you told another woman." "I didn't plan for it to become—" "You don't plan betrayal?" "No. But you make choices." He became silent. I looked at him. "That's what you don't understand." "What?" "You keep talking about the affair like it happened to you." He didn't answer. "It didn't just happen, Daniel." I felt tears finally beginning to gather in my eyes. "You chose every step. The first message, the first private conversation, the first lie, the first time you deleted something, the first time you met her outside work, the first time you came home and kissed me after seeing her. You chose all of it." He lowered his head. "I know." I wiped my cheek. "Do you?" He looked up. For the first time that night, I saw something in his eyes that looked less like fear and more like shame. "I do now." I stood. Then tomorrow, you can tell me everything. Claire? Everything. I walked toward the bedroom door. I'm not going to spend the rest of my life trying to piece together the truth from memories. He looked at me. Where are you going? I picked up a small overnight bag from the closet. To my sister's. Please don't leave. I paused. Then, I looked back at him. I already left. He stared at me. I touched the doorknob. I just haven't decided yet whether I'm coming back. And for the first time since I met Daniel, I walked out of our bedroom without wondering whether he was okay. I wondered whether I was. Before we continue with Claire's story, I want to ask you something. If you were sitting at that birthday table and suddenly realized the person beside your husband was his mistress, would you have confronted them right there, or would you have quietly walked away like Claire did? Tell me your answer in the comments. There is no right or wrong answer, because sometimes walking away takes more strength than staying and fighting. And if Claire's story has already touched something in you, take a moment to like this video, subscribe to Love Stories by Mr. Johnson, and turn on your notifications so you don't miss what happens next. Because Claire thought the hardest part was discovering the affair. She hadn't yet realized that the hardest part would be deciding whether the 12 years she shared with Daniel were worth fighting for. Let's continue. The next morning, I woke up before my alarm. For several seconds, I didn't remember where I was. Then, I saw the unfamiliar curtains, my sister's guest room, and everything came back. The birthday party, Vanessa, Daniel, the chair. I closed my eyes again. Sometimes waking up is the cruelest part. For a few beautiful seconds, your mind gives you a gift. You forget, then reality returns. I turned onto my side and stared at the ceiling. I had spent the night at my sister Rachel's house, but I hadn't really slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that dining table. I kept replaying the same moment. Evelyn pointing toward the chair, Vanessa sitting beside Daniel, Daniel looking at me, and me walking away. I wondered whether I had imagined the expression on his face. Shock, fear, regret, maybe all three. Or maybe I was simply looking for something that would make the situation less painful. My phone was on the nightstand. There were 7 missed calls. 5 from Daniel, 2 from Evelyn. I didn't call either of them back. Instead, I got out of bed and walked downstairs. Rachel was already in the kitchen. She was my younger sister by 3 years, although sometimes she acted as if she were the older one. She was standing over the stove in an oversized sweatshirt, making pancakes. She glanced at me. You look terrible. I smiled weakly. Good morning to you too. I'm serious. I didn't sleep. I figured. She slid a plate toward me. Eat. I'm not hungry. Claire. I sat down. She put a fork beside the plate. You're going to eat something. I looked at her. You're bossy. I learned from Mum. That made me smile. For the first time since the party, a genuine smile. Rachel noticed. There's my sister. I looked down at the pancakes. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. You don't have to know today. I feel like I should. Why? Because I'm 40. So I should know what I'm doing with my life. Rachel leaned against the counter. Claire, you're not taking a driving test. Your husband cheated on you. I stared at her. She softened. Sorry. It's okay. No, it isn't. She came over and sat across from me. You don't have to make a decision because Daniel is uncomfortable. I looked at her. What if I still love him? Then you still love him. What if I hate him? Then you hate him. What if I feel both? Rachel nodded. Then you're human. That sentence stayed with me, because I had spent the entire night trying to organize my emotions into something logical. Love, anger, grief, disappointment, longing, resentment. They were all fighting for space inside me. And maybe Rachel was right. Maybe I didn't need to choose one. Not yet. I took a bite of pancake. It tasted like nothing. Rachel watched me carefully. Do you remember when you first met him? I looked up. Why would you ask that? Because I know you. She paused. And because every time you talk about Daniel, you talk about who he is now. I think you need to remember who he was too. I frowned. Why? Because you need the whole story. The whole story. That phrase followed me upstairs later. I sat on the edge of the guest bed and opened the small box of photographs I had brought with me. I wasn't sure why I'd packed it. Maybe I had grabbed it without thinking. Maybe some part of me already knew I would need it. I lifted the first photograph, Daniel and me at a county fair. We were 26. He had cotton candy stuck to his jacket. I was laughing. I remembered that day. It had rained unexpectedly. We had been standing beneath a small metal awning, trying to stay dry. Daniel had taken off his jacket and put it over my head. You'll get wet, I'd said. I'm already wet. You'll get colder. Then, you'll have to take care of me. I had laughed. He had smiled. There was something effortless about us then. We didn't have to try to be close. We simply were. I turned the photograph over. In my handwriting were 4 words, "Best Saturday of my life." I stared at them. Then I whispered, "What happened to us?" There was no answer. Only another memory. I first noticed Daniel, because he listened. That's the truth. It wasn't his smile, although he had a good one. It wasn't his height or the way he dressed. It wasn't even his voice. It was the way he paid attention. We met at a coffee shop near my office. I had been working late. My laptop was open. 3 empty coffee cups sat beside it. I was exhausted. Daniel was at the table near the window. I'd seen him before. Several times. He always ordered black coffee. No sugar. No cream. I knew that because I'd started noticing him too. One evening, I closed my laptop and rubbed my eyes. He looked over. "You look like you're having a terrible day." I looked at him. "That's because I am." He smiled. "Fair enough." Then he went back to his book. I expected him to say something else. He didn't. That was the first thing I liked about him. He didn't turn my bad day into an opportunity to get my attention. He simply noticed. The following week, I saw him again. He looked up from his book. "Better day?" I smiled. "Much better." "Good." Again, he returned to his book. Eventually, we started talking. First about coffee, then books, then work, then everything else. I discovered that Daniel hated raisins. He discovered that I couldn't swim. I learned that he had once wanted to become a teacher. He learned that I had secretly wanted to open a small bookstore. We talked about things that didn't matter. Then we started talking about things that did. One night, I told him about my father. Our relationship had always been complicated. I had spent years trying to make sense of his emotional distance. Daniel listened. When I finished, he didn't tell me what I should do. He didn't say my father was a terrible person. He didn't tell me to forgive him. He simply said, "That must have been lonely." I looked at him. Those 4 words broke something open inside me. Because nobody had ever said it that way. They had told me to move on. To understand. To stop holding on to the past. But Daniel had named the feeling. Lonely. I nodded. It was. He reached across the table, not to hold my hand, just to rest his hand near mine. "I'm sorry." And I remember thinking, he sees me. That was the beginning. Not fireworks. Not instant attraction. Recognition. He saw something in me that I had spent years hiding. And I saw something in him too. A gentleness beneath all his confidence. A fear that he wasn't enough. A longing to be loved without having to earn it. We were both carrying things. We just didn't know how much those things would eventually affect us. 3 months later, Daniel asked me to move in with him. I said, no. He looked surprised. "You don't want to?" "I do." "Then why not?" "Because I don't want us to move in together because it's convenient." He smiled. "What do you want?" "I want us to know what we're doing." He nodded. "Okay." He didn't argue. That mattered to me. He respected my hesitation. A month later, he asked again. This time, I said yes. Our first apartment was terrible. The carpet was stained. The kitchen faucet leaked. The bedroom window wouldn't close properly. But I loved that apartment. We had almost nothing. 2 mismatched chairs, a second-hand couch, a tiny television, a mattress we'd bought from a discount store. But we had plans. We talked about buying a house, traveling, having children, growing old together. Daniel used to say, when we're 60, we're going to look back at this place and laugh. I would say, we're never going to afford a house if you keep buying expensive coffee. He'd grin. It's an investment. In what? Happiness. I used to laugh at him. Now, remembering it, I wanted to cry. Not because the memory was false. Because it had been true. That's what made everything so complicated. Our marriage hadn't been built entirely on lies. It had been built on real love. And then, somewhere along the way, real love had stopped being enough. The first major test came 2 years after we married. I lost my job. I remember sitting in the car outside our apartment, staring at the steering wheel. I didn't want to go inside. I felt ashamed. I thought Daniel would be disappointed. Instead, when I finally told him, he sat beside me. Okay? I looked at him. Okay? Yes. I lost my job. I heard you. What are we going to do? We're going to figure it out. What if I can't find another one? Then we'll keep looking. What if it takes months? Then it takes months. I started crying. Daniel pulled me close. You don't have to be successful every day for me to love you. That sentence became part of me. For years, I carried it. Whenever I felt inadequate, I remembered it. Whenever I doubted myself, I remembered the man who had said it. That was the Daniel I loved. The man who didn't make me feel like my value depended on what I could provide. The man who sat beside me when I was afraid. The man who made me feel safe enough to fail. And perhaps that's why I had such a difficult time accepting what he had become. Because I wasn't comparing him to another man. I was comparing him to himself. There is a strange cruelty in remembering the beginning of a relationship after the ending has already started. You begin noticing things you didn't notice before. Not because the memories changed, because you changed. I remembered how Daniel listened to me. Then I remembered when he stopped. I remembered how he used to ask about my day. Then I remembered when he started checking his phone while I talked. I remembered our Friday night dinners. Then I remembered how they became meals eaten in silence. I remembered the man who said, "You don't have to be successful every day for me to love you." Then I remembered the woman I had become trying to prove I was still worth loving. I had begun measuring my worth by how little I needed, how understanding I could be, how much I could tolerate, how quickly I could forgive, how rarely I complained. I thought I was being a good wife, but there is a difference between being loving and being afraid to ask for what you need. I didn't understand that then. I do now. That afternoon, Daniel called again. This time, I answered. "Hello?" There was silence on the other end. Then, "Thank you." "For what?" "For answering." I looked out the window. "What do you want?" "I want to tell you the truth." "You said that last night." "I know. And?" I wasn't honest enough. I closed my eyes. "Daniel, I know I don't deserve your patience." "No." "I know. But if you're going to tell me everything, don't protect yourself." He was quiet. "What do you mean?" "Don't give me the version that makes you look better." Another silence. "Okay. Tell me when it started." "I don't know exactly." "Then tell me what you remember." He took a breath. "I remember the first time Vanessa and I had lunch together." My chest tightened. "Where?" "At work." "When?" 8 months ago." "And what happened?" "We talked." "About?" He hesitated. "Our marriage." I closed my eyes. The same pain returned. But this time, I didn't run from it. I let myself feel it. Because if I was going to rebuild my life, whether Daniel was part of it or not, I needed to stop protecting myself with half-truths. "Keep going," I said. And Daniel began telling me the story. Not the version he had rehearsed. Not the version that would make him easier to forgive. The real one. And as I listened, I realized something that frightened me. The affair had begun 8 months ago, but the loneliness that made room for it had been growing for much longer. And now, I had to decide what mattered more. Finding someone to blame. Or finding the truth. Daniel kept talking. I didn't interrupt him. Not because I was calm. I wasn't. My heart was beating so hard that I could hear it. But there was something strangely powerful about finally hearing the truth from the person who had spent months avoiding it. "I met Vanessa through a project," he said. I sat at the small dining table in Rachel's kitchen, staring at the untouched coffee in front of me. She was working with our department. "Was she interested in you?" "I don't know." "You don't know?" "No." I almost laughed. "Daniel, you are 42 years old. You know when someone is interested in you." He sighed. "Maybe I did." "Did you like the attention?" Another pause. "Yes." That answer hurt, but I appreciated the honesty. "Why?" "I don't know." "Try." He exhaled. "Because she listened." I closed my eyes. There it was. The word I had been afraid of. Listened. I opened my eyes again. "Did you think I didn't listen?" "I think I stopped telling you things." "That's different." "I know." "Did you tell her things you stopped telling me?" "Yes." I stared at the wall. I wanted to be furious. Part of me was, but another part was remembering. The nights when Daniel came home, and I asked how his day had been. Fine. The mornings when I asked if something was wrong. Nothing. The weekends when I tried to start conversations. "Can we talk later?" Later rarely came. I had eventually stopped asking. That was one of the things I had to admit to myself. I had stopped reaching too. Not because I didn't care. Because reaching towards someone who continually pulled away becomes exhausting. And eventually, you start protecting yourself by pretending you don't need them. "Claire?" I looked at the phone. "I'm here." "I know I hurt you." "That's not enough." "I know. What did you think would happen?" "I didn't think." "That's the problem." He became quiet. I continued. "You keep saying you were lonely. You keep saying you didn't know what to do, but you did know. What do you mean? You knew how to call me. Silence. You knew where I lived. Silence. You knew my phone number. His breathing changed. You knew we were married. I know. You knew I loved you. I know. You knew exactly what you were risking. I know. And you did it anyway. He didn't defend himself. That was the first thing he had done correctly in days. After we ended the call, I remained at the kitchen table. Rachel had gone upstairs. The house was quiet. I stared at the coffee. It had gone cold. I remembered something Daniel had once said. People don't usually destroy their lives in one moment. He had said it years ago while we were watching a documentary about a couple going through a divorce. I had asked him what he meant. He said, "It's usually 100 little decisions." At the time, I had agreed. Now I wondered whether he remembered his own words. Because perhaps that was what had happened to us. Not one enormous mistake. 100 small choices. A conversation postponed. A feeling ignored. An apology never given. A question avoided. A secret kept. A phone turned face down. A door closed. A night spent apart. A lie told to avoid an argument. Then another. Then another. Until eventually, the distance became normal. That realization was painful because it meant I couldn't tell myself the marriage had suddenly been stolen from me. It had been changing while I was inside it. And I had been changing too. That evening, I opened the box of photographs again. I found one from our 5th anniversary. We had gone to a little restaurant by the river. I remembered Daniel wearing a grey suit. I remembered the candle between us. I remembered him reaching across the table. 5 years, he'd said. 5 years. Feels longer. I had frowned. That's not romantic. He laughed. I mean, it feels like I've known you forever. Better. He had squeezed my hand. I'd marry you again. I believed him. I still believed him when we celebrated our 10th anniversary. We hadn't gone anywhere fancy. We ordered takeout and watched an old movie. Halfway through the movie, Daniel fell asleep. I remember looking at him and thinking how lucky I was. I had loved the ordinary parts of our marriage. The grocery shopping, the Sunday laundry, the arguments about thermostat settings, the mornings when neither of us wanted to get out of bed, the evenings when Daniel would call from the grocery store and ask, "Do we need milk?" And I would say, "Yes." Then he'd come home with milk, eggs, cereal, and somehow a bag of chips he insisted was necessary. Those things had been love too. People sometimes imagine love as grand gestures, but most marriages aren't made of grand gestures. They're made of ordinary Tuesday nights. It's in whether someone notices you're tired, whether they remember your doctor's appointment, whether they ask how your meeting went, whether they listen when you say you're worried, whether they put their phone down when you're talking, whether they notice when your silence means something. That was what I missed most, not romance. Attention. I wanted to be noticed again. I remembered the first time I realized Daniel wasn't noticing me. It had been almost 2 years earlier. I had come home from work, unusually quiet. My boss had told me that a promotion I had worked toward for months was going to someone else. I had been disappointed, but I wasn't devastated. I wanted to talk to Daniel. He was sitting on the couch, scrolling through his phone. I walked into the room. Hey. Hey. I sat beside him. How was your day? Busy. He kept looking at his phone. Mine was awful. He looked up briefly. Why? I told him. He nodded. That sucks. Then he returned to his phone. I waited. Maybe he would ask more. He didn't. I stood. I'm going to shower. Okay. That was all. I remember standing in the bathroom afterward, looking at myself in the mirror. I remember thinking, maybe I'm expecting too much. That sentence became dangerous. Because once you start believing that your emotional needs are excessive, you begin apologizing for having them. I started asking for less attention, less conversation, less affection, less time. And because I asked for less, Daniel eventually assumed I needed less. Neither of us understood what was happening. We were adapting to an unhealthy version of our marriage, instead of repairing it. The following morning, I returned home. Daniel was sitting at the kitchen table. He stood when I entered. Hi. His eyes searched my face. How was your night? Long? I didn't sleep much. Neither did I. I put my bag down. He looked at me. I made coffee. I almost smiled. You remembered? Of course I remembered. I poured myself a cup. We stood on opposite sides of the kitchen. The same kitchen where we had once danced. The same kitchen where we'd argued about money. The same kitchen where Daniel had proposed. He had hidden my ring inside a cereal box. I had nearly thrown it away. I remembered screaming when I found it. Daniel! He had come running into the room. What? I held up the ring. Are you serious? He laughed. Will you marry me? I cried. Then I hit him with a dish towel. He laughed harder. That was the man I remembered. But memories are not instructions. They don't tell you what to do next. They only tell you where you've been. And I was beginning to understand that I couldn't spend the rest of my life living inside photographs. Claire? I looked at him. What? I know you don't trust me. No. I don't expect you to. Good. He nodded. I want to fix this. I leaned against the counter. Why? He looked confused. Because, the first, love you. I studied him. Do you love me? Yes. Then why did you do it? His eyes dropped. I don't have a good answer. That's honest. He looked back at me. I think I was unhappy with myself. I said nothing. I blamed the marriage for feelings that were actually inside me. That surprised me. He continued. I felt unsuccessful, old, stuck. I frowned. Stuck? Not because of you. Then why didn't you tell me? Because I didn't want to admit it. There it was, the thing underneath everything. Fear. Daniel had been afraid of feeling inadequate. Instead of admitting it, he had looked for someone who made him feel wanted. Vanessa hadn't created his insecurity. She had simply made it easier for him to avoid facing it. That didn't make what he did acceptable, but it made the picture clearer. I thought about something I had learned over the years. People often hurt others while trying to escape something inside themselves. That doesn't make the hurt less real. It simply explains why understanding someone's behavior doesn't always mean excusing it. Did Vanessa know about me? Yes. Did she know we were still married? Yes. I looked away. Then I don't want to meet her. You don't have to. And I don't want to hear about her. Okay. Not because I'm afraid of her. I know. Because she isn't the person I married. He nodded. I understand. I looked at him. No, Daniel, you don't. He waited. The hardest part isn't Vanessa. What is it? You. His face tightened. You are the person I trusted. He looked down. And now, every memory has a question attached to it. He slowly sat down. What question? I swallowed. Was it real? That was the question. Was the love real? Were the promises real? Were the nights we laughed real? Was the man I loved real? Or had I simply been in love with a version of him that no longer existed? I didn't say any of that aloud. I didn't need to. Daniel seemed to understand. I know I can't make you trust me again. No. But I can try. I nodded. Trying isn't enough. What is? Consistency. He looked at me. Every day. I continued. Not for a week. Not until you think I'm over it. Not until things feel normal again. He nodded slowly. Every day. Because trust isn't rebuilt by one conversation. I know. It is rebuilt by hundreds of small decisions. He looked at me. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. 100 small decisions had helped destroy our marriage. Maybe 100 small decisions could help rebuild it. Maybe. But I wasn't ready to find out. Not yet. That afternoon, I drove to the park where Daniel and I used to walk. I sat on a bench overlooking the lake. Children were playing nearby. A couple walked past holding hands. An elderly man was feeding birds. Life was continuing. That was one of the strangest things about heartbreak. The world didn't stop because yours had changed. Cars still moved. People still laughed. Restaurants still opened. The sun still came up. And you had to learn how to exist inside the ordinary world while carrying something extraordinary inside you. I opened my phone. There was a message from Daniel. I'm sorry. Another followed. I won't pressure you. Then, take whatever time you need. I stared at the messages. I didn't respond. Not because I wanted to punish him. Because for once, I wanted to make a decision without worrying about how he would feel about it. I looked across the lake, and I thought about the woman I had been 12 years earlier. She had believed love meant being there for someone no matter what. The woman sitting on that bench understood something different. Love mattered. But so did dignity. So did honesty. So did peace. And perhaps the hardest lesson of all was this. Sometimes, you don't lose a relationship when you walk away. Sometimes you finally discover whether there was anything healthy left to return to. I stood up. I didn't know whether my marriage would survive. I didn't know whether Daniel and I would ever sleep in the same bed again. I didn't know whether forgiveness was possible, but I knew one thing. I was no longer willing to sacrifice the truth just to preserve a memory. And that was the first real decision I had made for myself in years. For the next 3 days, Daniel and I lived in the same city like two people separated by an ocean. He called. I didn't answer. He texted. Sometimes I read the messages. Sometimes I didn't. He respected the space I had asked for, which somehow made everything more difficult. If he had become angry, I could have hated him. If he had blamed me, I could have convinced myself that leaving was easy. If he had said, "You pushed me away," I could have held on to my anger and used it as armor. But Daniel didn't. He apologized. He waited. He answered every question I asked. And somehow, his willingness to finally be honest made me remember how much I had once loved the man he was supposed to be. On the fourth morning, I called him. He answered before the second ring. "Claire?" His voice was quiet. "Are you somewhere private?" "Yes." "Can you talk?" "Of course." I sat at my sister's kitchen table. Rachel was upstairs. I had asked her not to come down. There were things I needed to hear without anyone else's reaction influencing mine. "Tell me everything," I said. Daniel was silent. "Everything?" "Everything you remember." He exhaled. "Okay." I waited. It started with lunch. I closed my eyes. "Where?" "At work." "Just you and her?" "Yes." "Why?" "We were working on a project. We had been staying late for several weeks. One afternoon she asked if I wanted to grab something to eat. And you said yes." "Yes." "Did you tell me?" "No." "Why?" "I didn't think it mattered." I opened my eyes. "That's where it begins, Daniel." "What?" "The secrecy." He didn't respond. "If it was innocent, why didn't you mention it?" "I don't know." "You do know." He sighed. "I didn't mention it because I knew you might ask questions." "And you didn't want questions?" "No." I looked down at my hands. That answer hurt more than I expected, not because lunch was significant, because of what it represented. He had already begun making decisions based on what he thought I should know. He had quietly created a private space in his life where I was no longer welcome. "When did you realize you liked her?" "That afternoon." I swallowed. "What did you like?" "She made me feel interesting." I stared at the wall. "Interesting?" "I know how that sounds. It sounds sad." "It was." "Why didn't you tell me you felt that way?" "I was embarrassed." "About what?" "About myself." He paused. I had been feeling like I wasn't accomplishing anything. I remembered. Daniel had always been ambitious. He had wanted to become a senior executive before 40. He had wanted a larger house, more money, more recognition. By 40, he had achieved many of those things. But somehow, he had still felt behind. "I thought getting promoted would make me feel better," he said. "It didn't." "No." "So you blamed the marriage?" "At first, maybe." I leaned back. "Maybe?" I started telling myself that I wasn't happy because we weren't happy. I closed my eyes. That sentence was familiar. People often make the mistake of believing that changing their surroundings will fix what hurts inside them. New jobs, new cities, new relationships, new houses. Sometimes, those things help. But sometimes you carry yourself into every new situation. Daniel had carried his insecurity into our marriage. Then he carried it into his relationship with Vanessa. "Did she know you were married?" "Yes." "Did you wear your wedding ring?" "Yes." "Did you tell her you loved me?" He paused. "Yes." My chest tightened. "While you were seeing her?" "Yes." I looked away. There are certain truths that hurt because they force you to accept how ordinary betrayal can become. Daniel had not stopped loving me before he betrayed me. That was what I couldn't understand. He had loved me and betrayed me. He had kissed me and lied to me. He had slept beside me and thought about another woman. Human beings were capable of holding contradictions that made no sense to the people they hurt. "What did you tell Vanessa about me?" Daniel didn't answer immediately. "Daniel, I told her we had problems." "Which problems?" "That we didn't talk anymore." "Did we?" "Not like we used to." I nodded slowly. "That part was true." "Yes. What else?" "I told her I felt like we'd become roommates." I looked down. That hurt because it was one of the things I had felt too. But hearing him say it to another woman made it feel different. He had taken something private from our marriage and handed it to someone else. "Did you tell her I was trying?" "No." That answer came quickly. I looked up. "What?" "I didn't tell her that." "Why?" "Because I didn't want her to think I was doing something wrong." There it was. The truth. Not loneliness. Not confusion. Not even unhappiness. Image. He wanted to be the wounded husband in Vanessa's story. He needed her to believe he was trapped in a marriage he had already emotionally left. I swallowed. "So you made me the villain." "I didn't call you a villain." "You didn't have to." He was quiet. "Did you tell her about the nights I waited for you?" "No." "The dinners I made?" "No." "The times I asked you what was wrong?" "No." "The fact that I encouraged you to take that promotion?" No. Did you tell her about my father's funeral? Silence. No. Did you tell her about the year I lost my job, and you told me I didn't have to be successful every day for you to love me? No. I laughed softly. You told her only the parts that made you look lonely. I know. And then you used her sympathy to make yourself feel better. I think so. I stared out the window. That was painful, but it was also strangely clarifying. Daniel hadn't fallen helplessly into an affair. He had constructed a version of his life that made the affair easier to justify. And once he had built that story, he had to keep feeding it. That was how dishonesty worked. One lie rarely stays alone. It needs another lie to protect it. Then another, then another. Eventually, the person telling them has to remember which version of reality they gave to each person. Did you ever plan to leave me? He was silent. Answer me. Yes. My stomach dropped. When? I thought about it. When? About 6 months ago. I stared at the table. 6 months? Yes. And you didn't? I was scared. Of what? Losing you. I almost laughed. You were afraid of losing me while having an affair. I know how contradictory that sounds. It isn't contradictory. He waited. It's selfish. His breathing changed. Yes. That was the first time he said it without qualification. I appreciated that. Did Vanessa know that I was thinking about leaving? Yes. Yes. And what did she think? She thought I was going to. But you didn't. No. Why? He took a long breath. Because every time I imagined actually leaving, I remembered everything. Everything? You. I closed my eyes. That's not an answer. I remembered our life. The good parts? All of it. Then why did you keep seeing her? I don't know. I shook my head. That's the problem, Daniel. What? You keep saying you don't know. I felt tears rising again. You've had months to think about this. I know. You're not a child. I know. You made adult decisions. I know. Then you need to be brave enough to understand your own decisions. He didn't answer. I wiped my eyes. I need to know something else. Okay. Did you ever compare us? Yes. That one word felt like a slap. How? I compared how I felt around her with how I felt at home. I nodded. And? I felt lighter with her. I looked down. Of course you did. What does that mean? It means she didn't know you. He was quiet. She knew the version of you that you wanted her to see. I continued. She didn't know your debts, your fears, your habits, your bad moods, your family, your responsibilities. She didn't know what it was like to live with you. That's true. Of course you felt lighter. I swallowed. When you don't have to be accountable to someone, almost any relationship feels easier. He didn't argue. That silence told me he understood. I thought about my own behavior. It would have been easier if I could say I had been the perfect wife. I hadn't. There were things I had done wrong. I had withdrawn. I had become impatient. I had stopped initiating conversations. I had allowed resentment to build. Sometimes Daniel would come home and ask, "What's wrong?" And I would say, "Nothing." Because I didn't want another argument. Sometimes he would ask, "Are you upset with me?" And I would say, "No." Even when I was, I had expected him to read my silence. That wasn't fair either. I had wanted him to notice what I refused to say. Over time, we had both become experts at avoiding discomfort. But there was a difference between my avoidance and his betrayal. I needed to remember that, because guilt can become dangerous after betrayal. The betrayed person can start searching for reasons to blame themselves. Maybe I wasn't affectionate enough. Maybe I worked too much. Maybe I should have listened more. Maybe if I'd noticed sooner. Maybe. But none of those questions changed the fundamental truth. Daniel had choices. So did I. And I was beginning to understand that my responsibility was to own mine without carrying his. Claire? I realized he was still on the phone. I'm here. I know I can't change what happened. No. But I want to tell you something. What? I was wrong when I thought being understood by someone else meant I was finally happy. I didn't respond. I wasn't happy. Then what were you? Escaping. That word stayed between us. Escaping. Maybe that was what he had been doing. Escaping himself. Escaping the uncomfortable conversations. Escaping the fear that he wasn't enough. Escaping the responsibility of admitting he was unhappy. And I had been escaping too. I had escaped into routines. Into work. Into taking care of things. Into telling myself that a quiet marriage was still a stable marriage. We had both been running. just in different directions. Thank you for telling me, I said. Does that mean anything? It means I heard you. Are you coming home? I closed my eyes. No. He went quiet. Not yet. Okay. I need time. I'll give you time. And Daniel? Yes? If you really want to repair this, don't do it because you're afraid I'll leave. He didn't answer. Do it because you finally understand what you did. I do. Then prove it. How? Don't ask me. He was silent. You spent months making decisions without asking me how they would affect me. I took a breath. Now you need to learn how to make better decisions without needing me to supervise you. I understand. We ended the call. I sat alone for a long time. I expected to feel relieved. Instead, I felt exhausted. The truth hadn't made me feel better. It had simply removed the uncertainty. And sometimes, uncertainty is painful. That evening, Rachel sat beside me on the porch. She handed me a cup of tea. Did he tell you everything? I don't know. Do you believe him? I looked toward the street. I believe he told me more truth than he has before. That's different. Yes. She waited. Are you going back? I don't know. Do you want to? I thought about it. I want the man I remember. Rachel nodded. But I don't know if I can live with a man who actually exists. She looked at me. Those are two different people. I know. And which one are you married to? I stared into my tea. The second one. Rachel squeezed my shoulder. Then don't make decisions based only on the first one. I looked at her. It was a simple sentence, but it felt like a door opening. Because maybe that was what I had been doing all these years. I had been married to the man Daniel had been. I had forgiven the man he was becoming, because I kept remembering the man he used to be. And perhaps healing would begin when I stopped confusing memories with evidence. That night, I went upstairs and opened my suitcase. I took out the blue dress I had worn to Evelyn's birthday. I stared at it. Then I folded it carefully. Not because I wanted to preserve the memory. Because I was finally ready to stop letting one night define the entire story. The birthday had exposed the betrayal. But it hadn't created it. The real story was 12 years long. And if I was going to decide whether my marriage deserved another chance, I needed to be honest about all 12 years. The beautiful ones, the painful ones, the quiet ones, the years I felt loved, the years I felt invisible, the moments I reached for Daniel, the moments I pulled away. Because if I only remembered the good, I would stay for the wrong reasons. And if I only remembered the betrayal, I might leave without understanding what had actually happened. I needed the whole truth, not the truth that protected Daniel, not the truth that made me look innocent, not the truth that made leaving easier, just the truth. And for the first time in 12 years, I was willing to face it. There is a dangerous moment that comes after someone tells you the truth. You start feeling sorry for them, not because what they did was right, but because you finally understand why they did it. And understanding can be confusing. It can make anger softer. It can make betrayal look less sharp. It can make you wonder whether you were too harsh. I discovered that during the weeks after Daniel confessed. The more he told me, the more complicated my feelings became. I began seeing the frightened man underneath the unfaithful husband. I remembered his childhood, his father's absence, his fear of failure, the pressure he put on himself, the way he had always measured his worth by achievement. I understood why Vanessa's attention had felt good. She admired him. She asked about his work. She laughed at his jokes. She made him feel successful when he was struggling to feel successful himself. I understood it. I simply refused to excuse it. There was a difference. It took me a while to understand that. 2 weeks after the birthday, Daniel asked if we could meet. Not at our house. Not at a restaurant. At the coffee shop where we had first met. I almost said no. Then I thought about how much of our marriage had been shaped by conversations we avoided. So, I agreed. I arrived first. The familiar smell of coffee filled the room. The same wooden tables were still there. The same large windows. Even the old lamp in the corner still flickered. I sat at our old table. Daniel arrived 10 minutes later. He stopped when he saw where I was sitting. You remembered? I remember everything. He smiled sadly. I know. He sat across from me. For a few moments, neither of us spoke. Then he said, I've been thinking about what you said. Which part? That I made choices. I waited. I've been telling myself that the affair happened because I was lonely. He looked down at his hands. But that's only part of the truth. What is the rest? I was afraid. Of what? Of admitting I was unhappy. I listened. I thought if I admitted I was unhappy, It meant our marriage had failed. And I couldn't handle the idea that I had failed at something I'd promised to protect. I looked at him. So instead, you found someone who made you feel successful. Yes. And you convinced yourself that was love. I think I did. Was it? He looked out the window. I don't know. I nodded. That was probably the most honest answer he could give. Do you love her? No. Are you sure? Yes. How do you know? He looked at me. Because when everything fell apart, I didn't want to lose her. He paused. I wanted to fix what I had destroyed with you. I looked down. There it was. The answer I had been afraid to want. But wanting an answer didn't mean I trusted it. Do you understand why I don't believe you yet? Yes. Why? Because I lied to you for months. And? Because you can't rebuild trust with words. I looked at him. You've been listening. I'm trying. Trying is a beginning. He nodded. Not a solution. Just a beginning. We ordered coffee. Neither of us touched it for several minutes. Finally, Daniel asked, "Can I tell you what I remember about us?" I nodded. When we first met, you used to talk with your hands. I smiled despite myself. I still do. I know. You still do it when you're excited. What's your point? I miss that. My smile disappeared. You haven't seen it in a long time. I know. Why? He looked down. Because I stopped asking you what excited you. The answer was simple and painful. I realized then that emotional distance rarely arrives announcing itself. Nobody wakes up one morning and says, "Today, I'm going to stop knowing my spouse." It happens gradually. You stop asking. Then you stop sharing. Then you stop noticing. Eventually, you become two people who know each other's schedules, but not each other's hearts. Do you remember our 5th anniversary? I asked. Yes. The restaurant by the river. Yes. You told me you'd marry me again. I meant it. I know. He looked at me. That's what makes this harder. I nodded. I know. He swallowed. I meant those things. I believe you. His eyebrows lifted slightly. You do? Yes. Then why can't you forgive me? I looked at him carefully. Because believing you loved me doesn't erase what you did to me. He nodded slowly. I understand. Do you? I think I do. I leaned forward. Daniel, forgiveness isn't a magic eraser. He remained silent. It doesn't make the consequences disappear. I know. And it doesn't mean I have to stay. I know. Forgiving you, if I ever do, will be something I do for my own peace. He nodded. Not something I give you so you can feel better. I understand. I sat back. That distinction mattered. For years, I had confused forgiveness with restoration. I thought if I forgave someone, I had to let them back into the same place in my life. But forgiveness and reconciliation were not identical. You could release resentment without reopening the door. You could understand someone without trusting them. You could love someone and still decide they were no longer safe for your heart. That was a lesson I wished I had learned earlier. Daniel reached into his coat pocket. He pulled out a small envelope. My eyes narrowed. What is that? Something I found. He placed it on the table. I opened it. Inside was a photograph. I recognized it immediately. Our first Christmas together. We were standing in front of a tiny tree. Daniel's arm was around my shoulder. I was holding a gift. On the back, in his handwriting, were the words, "First of many." I stared at it. Why did you bring this? Because I've been going through old things. Why? Because I've been trying to remember who I was. I looked at him. And? I don't like the person I've become. I studied his face. There was no performance in his expression. At least, I didn't think there was. But trust had made me suspicious. That was another consequence of betrayal. It changes how you interpret even sincerity. You begin wondering whether every apology has an agenda. Every tear becomes questionable. Every promise requires evidence. That isn't bitterness. It's what happens when someone's words stop matching their actions. Are you seeing Vanessa? I asked. No. Has she contacted you? Once. What did you do? I told her we couldn't have contact outside work. Did she agree? Yes. Do you still work together? Yes. I took a breath. That makes this harder. I know. How are you handling it? I requested a transfer. I looked at him. Why? Because I don't want to rebuild trust while asking you to ignore something that would make you uncomfortable. That surprised me. When? Last week. And? It's being processed. I nodded. That was different. Not a promise. An action. Small. but real. And I was beginning to understand something about trust. After betrayal, grand gestures are often meaningless. A person can buy flowers, write letters, cry, beg, promise forever. None of those things necessarily prove change. Change is often boring. It looks like transparency. It looks like keeping small promises. It looks like answering uncomfortable questions without becoming defensive. It looks like accepting consequences without demanding praise. It looks like doing the right thing when nobody is watching. Daniel still had a long way to go. So did I. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Yes." "Why didn't you tell me you were unhappy?" I looked down. "Because I didn't think it would change anything." "Why?" "Because I had tried." "When?" "Many times." He looked confused. I explained. "Remember when I used to ask you to put your phone away during dinner?" "Yes." "I stopped asking." "Why?" "Because you always said you were just checking something for work." He looked down. "I remember." "Remember when I asked you to take one weekend a month where we didn't talk about work?" "Yes." "You said you were too busy." "I was. You were always busy." He looked at me. "Claire." "And remember when I asked you if something was wrong?" "Yes." "You said no." "I didn't know how to explain it." "You could have said that." "I should have." I nodded. "Yes." For a while we sat silently. Then I said something I hadn't expected to say. "I failed you too." Daniel looked at me immediately. "No." "Yes." "You didn't cheat on me." "I know. But you don't have to take responsibility for what I did." "I don't." I shook my head. "That's not what I mean." I looked at him. "I stopped telling you what I needed." He was quiet. "I expected you to know." "Why?" "Because I thought you knew me." He nodded slowly. "I should have." "Maybe. But I should have told you." Yes. There it was. The uncomfortable truth. We had both contributed to the emotional distance, but not equally to the betrayal. That distinction mattered. I could take responsibility for my silence without taking responsibility for his affair. I could admit where I had failed without becoming the reason he failed. That was one of the hardest things I had ever learned. Sometimes accountability becomes unhealthy when it turns into self-punishment. You can say, "I could have communicated better," without saying, "Therefore, I deserved what happened." Those two sentences are not the same. I wished more people understood that. When we left the coffee shop, Daniel walked beside me. We stood outside for a moment. Cars passed on the street. People moved around us. It felt strangely ordinary. He looked at me. "I miss you." I swallowed. "I miss you too." His eyes filled with tears. But he didn't reach for me. That mattered. The old Daniel might have pulled me into his arms. This Daniel understood that he no longer had automatic access to me. "I want to hug you," he said. I looked at him. "Can I?" I hesitated. Then I nodded. He stepped forward slowly. His arms went around me. For several seconds, I stood there. I remembered what his embrace used to feel like. Safe, familiar, home. But this time, there was something else. Uncertainty. I stepped back first. Daniel let me go. Neither of us said anything. Then I got into my car. As I drove away, I realized something. I had expected forgiveness to arrive like a decision. It didn't. It arrived like a collection of small moments. The first honest conversation. The first apology without an excuse. The first boundary respected. The first uncomfortable truth accepted. The first time I could say I miss you without pretending everything was okay. Maybe healing wasn't about deciding whether I still loved Daniel. Maybe that part was already clear. I did. The harder question was whether I could love him without abandoning myself again. That evening, I sat alone in my apartment. I had not yet returned home permanently. I opened my journal. I hadn't written in years. At the top of the page I wrote, "What do I actually want?" I stared at the words. Then I began writing. I wanted honesty. I wanted emotional safety. I wanted communication. I wanted affection that didn't have to be requested every time. I wanted a husband who could tell me when he was struggling, instead of finding someone else to make him feel better. I wanted to be able to ask questions without being called insecure. I wanted to feel like a partner, not a caretaker, not a roommate, not an obligation. Then I stopped. I added one final sentence. I want to be able to love someone without losing myself in the process. I read it twice. Then I closed the journal. For the first time since the birthday party, I didn't feel like I was waiting for Daniel to decide what happened next. I was deciding too. And that changed everything. The next morning, Daniel sent me one message. "I won't ask you to come home. I will spend the time proving that I deserve the chance to ask someday." I read it. Then I put my phone down. I didn't reply. Not because I was angry, because I wanted to see whether the promise would survive without immediate reassurance. For 12 years I had measured Daniel's love by what he said. Now I would measure it by what he did when I wasn't standing beside him. That was the beginning of a different kind of waiting. Not waiting for my husband to return. Waiting to see whether the man I loved was willing to become someone I could trust again. And while Daniel began that work, I had my own work to do. Because there was another person I had neglected for years. Me. I didn't want to meet Vanessa. For the first few weeks after the birthday, I told myself I didn't need to. I knew enough. She was the woman who had been seeing my husband. She knew he was married. She had sat beside him at his mother's birthday party. That should have been enough. But life has a strange way of placing the conversations you don't want directly in front of you. It happened on a rainy Thursday afternoon. I had stopped at a small bookstore near my office. It was one of those places with narrow aisles, wooden shelves, and the faint smell of old paper. I had always loved bookstores. Before Daniel and I got married, I used to spend hours in them. That afternoon, I was standing in the relationship section, looking for a book about rebuilding trust, when I heard someone behind me say my name. Claire? I froze. I knew the voice. I turned slowly. Vanessa stood 3 feet away. She wasn't wearing the cream dress from the birthday. There was no makeup that made her look glamorous. No confident smile. Just a woman in a grey coat holding a book against her chest. For a second, neither of us spoke. Then she said, "I've wanted to apologize." I looked at her. For what? She swallowed. For being there. I almost laughed. That's a strange thing to apologize for. I know. You didn't seat yourself there. No. Daniel's mother did. Yes. And Daniel chose to sit beside me. Vanessa looked down. Yes. Then what exactly are you apologizing for? She took a breath. For my part, in what happened. I studied her face. There was something different about seeing her outside that dining room. At the party, she had been a symbol. The other woman. The threat. The person sitting in my place. Standing in a bookstore on a rainy afternoon, she was simply Vanessa. A woman. A stranger. A person I knew almost nothing about. And that realization made me uncomfortable. Because anger is easier when you turn someone into a character. It becomes harder when you remember they are human. I don't know what you want from me, I said. I don't want anything. Then why are you talking to me? Because I think you deserve to know the truth. I looked at her. Which truth? The one Daniel didn't tell you. My stomach tightened. I closed the book in my hand. How long have you known? About the affair? Yes. She looked at me. 8 months. 8 months. She nodded. Did you know he was married? Yes. Did you know we lived together? Yes. Did you know he came home to me every night? Her expression changed. Not every night. I stared at her. That wasn't what I asked. She looked uncomfortable. I knew he lived with you. That's not the same thing. No. I stepped closer. Then let's be honest. You knew. Yes. You knew he was married. Yes. And you still became involved with him. She nodded. Yes. I appreciated the fact that she didn't try to avoid it. She could have said she didn't know. She could have blamed Daniel. She could have told me she had been deceived. Instead, she stood there and accepted her part. I made a bad choice, she said. I looked away. Yes. I know that doesn't make it better. No. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't. I know. There was no anger in her voice. Just resignation. I looked back at her. Then what do you want me to know? She hesitated. Daniel told me you were separated. I felt my chest tighten. We were never separated. I know that now. How? Because, after the birthday. She stopped. After the birthday, I realized there were things he hadn't told me either. I frowned. What things? That you were still wearing your wedding ring. I looked down at my hand. I had stopped wearing it after the birthday. Vanessa continued. He told me you, and he had been emotionally separated for a long time. I laughed bitterly. Emotionally separated. I know. Did you believe him? Yes. Why? She looked at me. Because I wanted to. That answer surprised me. Why? Because if I didn't believe him, I had to admit I was becoming involved with a married man who wasn't planning to leave his wife. I said nothing. She looked down at her hands. I wasn't proud of it. But you continued. Yes. Why? Because I fell in love with him. The words landed quietly. I had expected them to hurt. They didn't. Not the way I thought they would. Maybe because I had already heard Daniel say he cared about her. Maybe because the worst pain had already happened. Or maybe because I finally understood that another person's feelings didn't diminish mine. I looked at her. Did he tell you he loved you? She nodded. Yes. My heart tightened. How often? Enough. I looked away. There were some questions you didn't need answered. But I asked anyway. Did he ever talk about our future? Yes. What did he say? That he wasn't sure whether your marriage could survive. I nodded slowly. And what did he say about leaving me? He said he was going to. Did he? No. Why? I don't know. She paused. At first, I thought he was scared. Scared of what? Losing everything. I looked at her. And eventually I realized he didn't want to lose you. I stared at her. She continued. He wanted me to believe he was leaving you. But whenever I asked when, there was always a reason he couldn't. Work? Yes. Money? Yes. Your family? Yes. Timing? She nodded. Yes. I smiled sadly. That's Daniel. She looked at me. What do you mean? He has always been afraid of making difficult decisions. I thought about our marriage, the way he avoided uncomfortable conversations, the way he waited for problems to solve themselves, the way he would say, let's talk about it tomorrow. Sometimes tomorrow came. Sometimes it didn't. I don't think he intended to become this person, I said. Vanessa was quiet. Neither do I. That was the first moment I realized something. We were both talking about the same man, but we had known two different versions of him. We walked toward the front of the bookstore. Neither of us had planned to have coffee together. Yet somehow, 10 minutes later, we were sitting in a cafe next door. It felt strange, almost absurd. The wife and the mistress sitting across from each other with coffee between them. But there was no audience, no birthday table, no family watching, no Daniel in the middle. Just two women trying to understand how they had ended up connected by the same man's choices. Vanessa wrapped both hands around her cup. Can I ask you something? I nodded. Did you know? Know what? That something was wrong. I looked at her. Yes. When? I don't know. Before me? Yes. She looked surprised. How? Because I knew my husband. I smiled faintly. Or I thought I did. She looked down. What did he tell you about me? That you were a colleague. Nothing else? Nothing. I looked at her. Did he tell you about the first time we met? No. The coffee shop? No. The apartment? No. Our wedding? She shook her head. The miscarriage? Her face changed. No. My father's funeral? No. The years we spent trying to build our careers? No. I nodded. He didn't tell you those things because they complicated the story. What story? The story where he was a lonely husband, trapped in a marriage that had already ended. She looked at me. And it wasn't like that. No. Was your marriage happy? I thought carefully. Sometimes. She waited. Was it healthy? I hesitated. Not by the end. She nodded. That's what I was told. You were told the truth about some things. Like what? That we stopped communicating. She looked at me. That's true. That we had become emotionally distant. Yes. That I had stopped asking questions. Did you? Yes. She nodded slowly. But there was another side. What? I was still trying. She looked at me. How? I asked him to talk to me. I thought about it. More than once. I told her about the evenings when I asked him what was wrong. The dinners, when I asked him to put his phone away. The weekends when I suggested we spend time together. The little efforts. The attempts to reconnect. She listened quietly. He didn't tell me that. I know. Why? Because then you would have had to see him differently. She lowered her eyes. You're right. No. She looked up. I'm not trying to make you feel guilty. I know. I just want you to understand. I do. We sat quietly. Then she said something I didn't expect. I think I was in love with the version of him he showed me. I looked at her. She continued. He was attentive. He remembered everything I said. He made me laugh. He told me I was beautiful. He listened to me. I almost smiled. He's very good at listening when he wants to. She looked embarrassed. Did he do that with you? At first. And then? Life happened. She nodded. I think that's what scared me. What? That maybe, if he left you for me, one day, I'd become you. I stared at her. She gave a sad smile. I know that sounds terrible. No. It does. It sounds honest. She looked down. I started wondering whether the problem was the marriage or the person. I knew what she meant. If he could lie to you, she said, how would I ever know he wouldn't lie to me? I didn't answer, because there was no answer I could give. Trust isn't transferred automatically. If someone betrays one person, another person doesn't get a guarantee that they won't be betrayed too. People change. People learn. People repeat patterns. The only thing that matters is what they do afterward. Did you end things? I asked. Yes. When? After the birthday. I nodded. Why? She looked at me. Because I saw the way he looked at you. My throat tightened. What do you mean? He wasn't looking at you like a man who wanted to replace his wife. She paused. He looked terrified that he'd lost the woman he loved. I looked away. I didn't know whether that made me feel better or worse. That's not an excuse, she added. I know. But I thought you should know. I stared at my coffee. Sometimes the truth doesn't give you closure. Sometimes it simply gives you another piece of the puzzle. And I wasn't sure I wanted the whole picture anymore. When we left the cafe, the rain had stopped. Vanessa stood beside her car. I don't expect us to be friends. I almost laughed. Neither do I. She smiled. But I am sorry. I nodded. Thank you. She opened her car door, then stopped. Claire? Yes? Can I tell you one thing? Okay. Don't let what he did make you question whether you were enough. I froze. She continued. Because I spent months comparing myself to you. I looked at her, and I realized something. What? I wasn't better than you. She swallowed. I was simply different. I felt something loosen inside my chest. For months, I had imagined Vanessa as everything I wasn't. Younger, more exciting, more interesting, more desirable. But perhaps that was another lie betrayal had taught me to believe. Infidelity often creates a false competition. The betrayed person looks at the other person and asks, what did she have that I didn't? But betrayal isn't a beauty contest. It isn't a measurement of worth. Someone else's choice to be unfaithful does not automatically mean the betrayed person lacked something. Sometimes the betrayer was simply unwilling to confront their own dissatisfaction honestly. I looked at Vanessa. Thank you. She nodded. Then we went our separate ways. I sat in my car for several minutes before starting the engine. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel relieved. I didn't feel angry. I felt tired. But beneath the tiredness was something new. Clarity. Vanessa wasn't the villain. She wasn't my replacement. She wasn't the reason my marriage had become distant. She had entered a space Daniel had already created. That didn't make her innocent. But it meant I had been looking in the wrong direction. For weeks, I had been asking, why was she chosen over me? Now I was asking a different question. Why did my husband believe he could have two realities at once? And that question led me back to Daniel. Because the woman sitting beside him at the birthday party hadn't destroyed my marriage. My husband had, but he hadn't done it alone. He had carried years of fear, avoidance, insecurity, and silence into our relationship. And I had carried my own fears too. The difference was that I had buried mine inside myself. He had carried his into someone else's arms. Neither choice had been healthy, but only one of us had broken our vows. As I drove home, I realized something else. Understanding Vanessa hadn't made me want Daniel back. It had done something more important. It had stopped me from blaming myself for being replaced. Because I hadn't been replaced, I had been betrayed. And those were not the same thing. When I reached my sister's house, I sat in the driveway and turned off the engine. My phone buzzed. Daniel, how are you? I stared at the message. For once, I didn't feel the urge to answer immediately. I looked at the house, then at the sky, then back at the phone. I typed, I'm beginning to understand what happened. I stopped, then added, but understanding doesn't mean I'm ready to come home. I sent it. A minute later, his response appeared. I understand. Take your time. I put the phone down, and for the first time since the birthday party, I believed him. For several days after meeting Vanessa, I couldn't stop thinking about one sentence she had said. I think I was in love with the version of him he showed me. At first, I thought she was talking about Daniel. Then I realized she was also talking about me, because wasn't that what I had been doing for years? Loving a version of him. Not necessarily a false version, just an old one. The Daniel who sat beside me when I cried. The Daniel who remembered my coffee order. The Daniel who held my hand at my father's funeral. The Daniel who told me I didn't have to be successful every day for him to love me. I had kept those memories alive long after the relationship had begun changing. Maybe I had been doing the same thing Vanessa had done, holding on to a version of Daniel that made it easier to believe everything would eventually return to normal. But there was one important difference. I had known him for 12 years. She had known him for 8 months. And perhaps neither of us had known the whole man. That evening, I called Daniel. He answered immediately. Claire, can I ask you something? Anything. Did you tell Vanessa that we were separated? He became quiet. Yes. Why? I thought we were. We weren't. I know. Then why did you say it? He sighed. Because I wanted her to believe I was going to leave. I closed my eyes. So you lied to her? Yes. You lied to me. Yes. You lied to yourself. He didn't answer. I continued. You created different versions of reality for different people. I know. Why? Because I was afraid of losing either of you. I sat down. Do you hear how selfish that sounds? Yes. You wanted the comfort of our marriage and the excitement of another relationship. I know. And you expected both women to wait while you decided what you wanted. I wasn't thinking clearly. You were thinking clearly enough to hide your phone. He was silent, clearly enough to delete messages. Silence, clearly enough to lie. I know. Then don't tell me you weren't thinking. He exhaled. You're right. That was the answer I needed. Not because it made things better, because I needed him to stop hiding behind confusion. There was a difference between being confused and refusing to take responsibility. A person can genuinely struggle with their emotions. They can be uncertain. They can feel lost. But they are still responsible for how they behave while they're lost. That was one of the hardest lessons I had learned. Feelings are not always choices. Actions are. Did you love Vanessa? I asked. I cared about her. That's not what I asked. I don't know. You told her you loved her. Yes. So which is it? I thought I did. I frowned. How can you not know? Because I realized I didn't really know her. I said nothing. I knew the version of her I saw at work. And she knew the version of you wanted her to see. Yes. Then what was it? I think it was an escape. I leaned back. An escape from what? Myself. The answer was quiet. For a moment, I felt sorry for him. Then I reminded myself that compassion didn't require surrender. I understand that you're struggling, I said. I know, but I need you to understand something too. Okay. You don't get to use your pain to make me responsible for your choices. I won't. You don't get to say you were lonely and expect that to erase what you did. I know. And you don't get to make Vanessa the villain just because the affair ended. I won't. Good. There was silence. Then Daniel said, Can I tell you something about you? I almost smiled. You always do this. Do what? Change the subject when the conversation gets uncomfortable. He laughed softly. Oh, you deserved that. You did. He became quiet. I never thought you would leave. I looked down. Why? Because you always stayed. That sentence hit me harder than I expected. I didn't respond. Daniel continued. Whenever we argued, you were the one who came back first. That's not something to be proud of. I know that now. No, you don't. What do you mean? I taught you that I would tolerate discomfort indefinitely. He was quiet. I taught you that I would keep the peace. Claire, I thought that was love. I swallowed. Maybe I was wrong. After the call, I went for a walk. The evening air was cool. I walked slowly through the neighborhood, thinking about what Daniel had said. I never thought you would leave. There was a painful truth hidden inside that sentence. Sometimes people don't realize the cost of taking someone for granted until that person finally stops paying it. I had spent years making myself dependable. I rarely cancelled plans. I kept promises. I remembered birthdays. I showed up. I forgave. I stayed. And somewhere along the way, Daniel stopped seeing those things as choices I was making. He began seeing them as guarantees. That was my mistake, too. I had turned devotion into predictability. I had made it easy for him to assume I would always be there. But love should never become an excuse to stop appreciating the person who gives it. A week later, Evelyn called me. I almost didn't answer. When I did, there was a long silence. Claire? Yes. It's me. I know. I don't know if you want to speak to me. I don't, she inhaled. But I think I need to. I sat down. What do you want? I owe you an apology. I closed my eyes. For what? For the birthday. I waited. I shouldn't have seated Vanessa beside Daniel. No. I thought I was helping. How? I thought if you saw everything clearly, you would finally make a decision. I stared at the wall. What decision? Whether you wanted to remain married. I almost laughed. So you humiliated me to force me to make a decision. I know how it sounds. It sounds exactly like what it was. She became quiet. I was angry with Daniel. Then why punish me? I wasn't trying to punish you. But that's what happened. I know. I listened. I thought you already knew about Vanessa. I frowned. What? I thought Daniel had told you. He hadn't. I assumed. You assumed? She sighed. Yes. I shook my head. There it was again. Assumption. So much damage in my marriage had come from things people assumed instead of asking. Daniel assumed I didn't want to hear about his unhappiness. I assumed he would tell me if something was wrong. Evelyn assumed I knew about Vanessa. Vanessa assumed Daniel's marriage was already over. Everyone had been living inside a version of reality constructed by incomplete information, and the consequences had become enormous. Did you know about the affair before the birthday? I asked. Silence. Yes. My stomach dropped. How long? A few months. I closed my eyes. Why didn't you tell me? Because he's my son. I nodded slowly. That isn't an answer. It's the only one I have. No. My voice remained calm. It's an explanation. She was silent. You protected him. Yes. From the consequences. Yes. And you knew I was walking into that birthday party believing everything was normal. I know. How could you? I thought you would eventually find out. From whom? She didn't answer. I already knew. She expected me to discover it. Perhaps she believed truth was less painful when it arrived indirectly. She was wrong. Truth doesn't become kinder because someone else chooses the timing. I want to tell you something, Evelyn said. What? I've spent my entire life protecting Daniel. I listened. His father left when he was young. I knew that. He was 11. I remember. He didn't understand why. I know. He thought it was his fault. I said nothing. He spent years believing that if he had been better, his father would have stayed. I felt something shift inside me. Daniel's fear of failure suddenly made more sense. He grew up believing people leave when you disappoint them, Evelyn said. I swallowed. And now? Now he sometimes leaves emotionally before anyone has the chance to leave him. I thought about that. It sounded like Daniel. When things became difficult, he withdrew. When conversations became uncomfortable, he disappeared into work. When he felt inadequate, he became distant. Perhaps he had been protecting himself from abandonment by becoming the one who emotionally abandoned first. Understanding that pattern was valuable. But it wasn't an excuse. I told Evelyn exactly that. His childhood explains some of his fears. Yes, it doesn't excuse the affair. I know, it doesn't excuse lying. I know, it doesn't excuse what you did either. She took a breath. I know. That was the first time I felt like she truly understood me. Claire, she said quietly. Yes? Do you still love him? I looked out the window. The honest answer came immediately. Yes. She didn't respond. But I don't know if I can trust him. I understand. No. I looked down. You don't. She waited. Those are two different things. Yes. I can love someone and still know that being with them may not be good for me. Evelyn was silent. And I can forgive someone without giving them the same access to me. I understand. I smiled sadly. Maybe you do. A few days later, Daniel came to see me. He didn't ask to come inside. He stood outside Rachel's house with his hands in his coat pockets. I brought something. He handed me a small box. I opened it. Inside was my wedding ring. I stared at it. I found it. I didn't know you had it. You left it in the bathroom. I looked at him. I took it off that night. I know, he swallowed. I don't want you to wear it. I looked up. What? I don't want you to wear it because you feel obligated. I stared at him. I want you to decide what it means. I closed the box. Why are you giving it back? Because I don't want the symbol of our marriage to become a weapon. What do you mean? I don't want to look at your hand every day and ask whether you've forgiven me. I was quiet. I want you to be free to decide. That was perhaps the first truly selfless thing Daniel had done since the affair began. He wasn't asking for reassurance. He wasn't asking me to prove I still loved him. He was giving me something back. Choice. I sat on the porch after he left. I opened the box again. The ring caught the afternoon light. I remembered the day he gave it to me. The tiny apartment. The cereal box. The dish towel I had hit him with. The laughter. The promise. I remembered how certain I had been. Then I looked at the ring again. It wasn't the promise. It was only a symbol of the promise. The real meaning would come from what we chose to do next. I put the box in the drawer. I didn't throw it away. I didn't put it on. I simply left it there. Waiting. Not for Daniel. For me. 3 months passed. During those months, Daniel didn't pressure me. He attended therapy. He transferred departments. He became more transparent. He answered questions without becoming defensive. He didn't ask whether I was coming home. He didn't send me flowers every day. He didn't make grand promises. Instead, he did something much harder. He became consistent. I noticed. Of course I noticed. I always noticed. But this time, I wasn't looking for reasons to convince myself he had changed. I was simply observing. There is a difference. I began learning that trust isn't rebuilt because someone says, "Trust me." It is rebuilt when their behavior gives you fewer reasons not to. Slowly, quietly, over time. One evening, Daniel called. "How are you?" "I'm okay." "Good." There was silence. Then he said, "Do you remember the first time we talked about having a family?" I smiled. "Yes. We were sitting on that terrible couch." "The one with the broken leg?" "Yes." "You nearly fell through it." "I did fall through it." I laughed. He laughed too. For a few seconds, it felt like old times. Then the silence returned. But this time, the silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was simply two people remembering. "Claire?" "Yes?" "I miss who we were." I looked out the window. "I do too, but I don't want to go back." That surprised me. "Why?" "Because going back means pretending nothing happened." I nodded. "What do you want?" He took a breath. "If there is ever a future for us, I want it to be something new." I closed my eyes. Something new. Not a repaired version of the old marriage. Not a return to the beginning. Something different. Something more honest. Something built by two people who finally understood that love isn't protected by pretending everything is fine. It is protected by telling the truth when everything isn't. "I don't know if we have a future," I said. "I know, but I'm willing to find out." There was silence. Then Daniel said softly, "That's enough." And for the first time, I didn't feel pressured by his hope. I felt respected by it. That night, I opened my journal. I wrote, "Understanding is not the same as excusing." Then beneath it, "Forgiveness is not the same as reconciliation." Then, "Love is not the same as self-abandonment." I stared at those 3 sentences. They felt like lessons I had spent years learning the hard way. But there was one more sentence I needed to write. I picked up my pen. "And sometimes, walking away is not the end of love. It is the beginning of honesty." I closed the journal. Outside, rain began tapping against the window. For the first time in months, I didn't feel like I was waiting for my old life to return. I was beginning to wonder whether something better could grow from what had been broken. Not perfect, not painless, just honest. And perhaps that was the kind of love I should have been asking for all along. 3 months after the birthday, Evelyn called me on a Sunday afternoon. I was sitting at the dining table in Rachel's house, sorting through old photographs. I had developed a strange habit of revisiting the past. Not because I wanted to live there, because I was trying to understand it. I had discovered that memory could be both comforting and dishonest. It showed you what happened, but not always why. It preserved someone's smile while quietly forgetting the argument that happened 5 minutes later. It remembered the anniversary dinner, but forgot the weeks of silence that came before it. It remembered the kiss. It remembered the promise. It remembered the wedding. But it didn't always remember the loneliness. My phone vibrated. I glanced at the screen. Evelyn. I stared at her name. For several seconds, I considered letting it ring. I still wasn't ready to hear her voice. Not after what she had done. Not after learning that she had known. But there was another part of me that was tired of avoiding difficult conversations. I had spent too many years avoiding them. So, I answered. "Hello? Claire?" "Yes." There was a long silence. Then she said, "I don't know if you want to hear from me." "You're right." Her breathing changed. "I understand. Why did you call?" "I need to apologize." I leaned back. "You've apologized before." "I know." "Then what is different this time?" "I didn't tell you the whole truth." I frowned. "What truth?" "I knew about Vanessa before the birthday." My stomach tightened. "I know. I don't think you know how long." "How long?" 5 months. I closed my eyes. 5 months. That meant she had known before I had even suspected. 5 months? Yes. And you never told me. No. Why? There was a long silence. Because I was afraid. Of what? Of losing my son. I opened my eyes. You thought telling me would make me leave him. Yes. So you protected him. Yes. From the consequences of his own choices. Yes. I looked down at the photographs scattered across the table. One showed Evelyn holding my hand on my wedding day. She had been crying. She had whispered, "Welcome to the family." I had believed her. I had loved her. Maybe that was why her silence hurt almost as much as Daniel's betrayal. Daniel had broken a promise. Evelyn had broken a bond. "You called me your daughter," I said. "I know. You told me I was family." "I know. Then why didn't you treat me like family?" She started crying. "I don't know." I swallowed. "That's not enough." "I know. You don't get to tell me you love me and then protect the person hurting me simply because he's your son." "I understand." "No." My voice was still calm, but my hands were shaking. "You don't understand." She waited. "Because you made a choice too." "I did." "You knew I was walking into that birthday party." "Yes." "You knew Vanessa would be sitting beside Daniel." "Yes." "You knew I didn't know." "Yes." "And you still let me walk into that room." "I thought—" I interrupted her. "That's the problem." She went quiet. "You thought—" I continued. "You thought I would eventually find out." "Yes." "You thought Daniel would tell me." "Yes." "You thought the truth would come out eventually." "Yes." "But you never asked me what I wanted." "No. You made a decision about my life without giving me the truth I needed to make my own decision." She cried quietly. I looked away. That was what hurt most. Not only that, she had protected Daniel, that she had taken away my choice. Choice mattered. I had spent months thinking about that. When someone lies to you, they don't simply hide information. They take away your ability to make an informed decision. If I had known about Vanessa 6 months earlier, I might have confronted Daniel. I might have gone to counseling. I might have left. I might have stayed. But the decision would have been mine. Instead, I had continued living inside a reality that other people knew was false. That was a kind of betrayal I hadn't understood before. "I want to explain something," Evelyn said. "I'm listening." "Daniel has always been afraid of losing people." "I know. His father left." "I know. When he was 11. "I know. He never recovered." I said nothing. "He thinks if someone is angry with him, they will eventually leave." I frowned. "Then, why did he betray me?" "Because sometimes people who fear abandonment create the exact thing they're afraid of." I sat quietly. That was true. Daniel had spent his life afraid people would leave. Yet he had behaved in ways that made leaving more likely. Fear can become self-fulfilling when it controls behavior. But again, understanding the pattern didn't erase the consequences. "Did you ever tell him that?" "Tell him what?" "That his fear of abandonment might be making him push people away." She sighed. "Many times." "Did he listen?" "Sometimes." I almost smiled. "That sounds like him." Evelyn laughed softly through her tears. "Yes." For a few seconds, we shared a memory of the same man. That was strange. Then I remembered why we were speaking. "Did you like Vanessa?" She paused. "Yes." "I wasn't expecting that." "Why?" "She was kind." "To you?" "Yes." I looked down. "Did you think she was better for Daniel?" "I thought she understood him." The sentence stung. "But you didn't know my marriage." "No. You only knew what Daniel told you." "Yes. And yet, you decided she understood him better." "I was wrong." "Why?" "Because I confused his comfort with compatibility." I was quiet. That was a good distinction. People often feel deeply understood by someone who has only seen them during a limited part of their life. It is easy to feel compatible when there are no bills to pay together, no family emergencies, no difficult history, no shared responsibilities, no years of disappointment. A relationship outside the pressures of ordinary life can feel effortless. But marriage isn't lived in perfect conditions. It is lived in kitchens, hospitals, job losses, family arguments, bad moods, financial stress, exhaustion, sickness, success, failure. Real compatibility is tested when life stops being romantic. Vanessa had never seen all of Daniel. Neither had I, apparently. But I had seen more, and I had loved him through more. That didn't make me superior. It simply made our history different. "Claire," Evelyn said. "Yes?" "I need to tell you something else." I waited. I was the one who encouraged Vanessa to come to the birthday. My heart sank. "What?" "I invited her." "Why?" "Because I wanted Daniel to stop hiding." I stared at the table. "So you deliberately brought her into the room?" "Yes." "You knew I would be there?" "Yes." "You knew she would be sitting beside him?" "Yes." I stood from the chair. I felt suddenly dizzy. Why? I thought if you saw them together, the truth would finally become impossible to deny. I laughed bitterly. You could have told me. I was afraid. You keep saying that. I know. Afraid of what? Of Daniel choosing Vanessa. I turned toward the window. So you sacrificed me to test him? No. That's exactly what you did. I wanted him to face the consequences. Then why did I have to be the one humiliated? She began crying again. I didn't think it would hurt you that much. I turned around. You didn't think? She looked down. I stared at her. Yes, I know. And you can't undo it. I know. Then don't ask me to. I won't. That answer stopped me. I expected her to defend herself. She didn't. Instead, she said, I am sorry. Not, but, not, I was trying to help. Not you should understand. Just, I am sorry. Sometimes, an apology becomes meaningful only when the person giving it stops trying to control how you receive it. I didn't forgive her that afternoon, but I heard her. That was enough. After we ended the call, I sat on the floor beside the dining table. I felt exhausted, not angry, not even sad. Rachel came downstairs. She looked at me. What happened? Evelyn called. What did she want? To apologize. Rachel sat beside me. Did you forgive her? No. Do you think you ever will? I don't know. She nodded. That's okay. I looked at her. I thought forgiveness was supposed to be the goal. Who told you that? I don't know. Maybe forgiveness isn't always the first goal. What is? Understanding what you need. I looked at her. She continued. You don't have to forgive someone on their schedule. That stayed with me. I had spent so much time worrying about everyone else's feelings. Daniel's, Evelyn's, Vanessa's, even Rachel's. I had barely asked myself what I needed. Maybe that was another habit I had to break. That night, I opened my journal again. I wrote, what do I need? I stared at the question. Then I began. I need honesty. I need respect. I need time. I need emotional safety. I need to know that when someone has a problem with me, they will come to me. I need to stop assuming that silence means peace. I need to stop treating discomfort like danger. I need to stop apologizing for having needs. I stopped writing. Then I added, I need to know that I can walk away without becoming the villain. I read that sentence twice. Then I closed the journal, because perhaps that was what I had feared all along. Not losing Daniel, not being alone, being seen as the person who gave up, the difficult wife, the unforgiving woman, the one who couldn't save her marriage. But marriage isn't a test where the person who stays the longest automatically wins. Sometimes staying is brave. Sometimes leaving is brave. Sometimes rebuilding is brave. And sometimes the bravest thing is refusing to make a decision until you know what you truly want. 2 days later, Daniel came to see me. He stood outside the house. I heard from Mom. I looked at him. What did she tell you? That she apologized. She did. I'm sorry. I studied his face. Did you know she invited Vanessa? No. Did you know she planned to seat her beside you? No. I believed him. At least, I wanted to. He looked down. She shouldn't have done that. No. She thought she was forcing me to make a choice. She did. I'm sorry you were caught in the middle. I looked at him. I wasn't in the middle. He frowned. I was your wife. He swallowed. Yes. I wasn't an obstacle between you and Vanessa. I know. I wasn't something you needed to choose between. I know. I was the person you had already promised. His eyes filled with tears. I know, and that is what I need you to understand. He nodded. I do. I looked at him for several seconds. Then I said, come inside. He looked surprised. Are you sure? Yes. We walked into the house, not as husband and wife. Not yet. Just two people who had finally become willing to sit in the same room with the truth. And maybe that was where healing actually began. Not with forgiveness. Not with reconciliation. With honesty. Daniel sat across from me at the kitchen table. The same table where we had eaten thousands of meals. The same table where I had once helped him prepare for job interviews. The same table where we had celebrated promotions, birthdays, and ordinary Tuesday nights. Now we were sitting across from each other like two people negotiating the terms of a life that had already changed. Daniel looked at me. Do you hate my mother? I shook my head. No. Are you sure? I am angry with her. That's different. Yes. He looked down. I've never seen her like this. Like what? Guilty. I almost smiled. She should feel guilty. I know. She made a choice. Yes. And she knew it could hurt me. Yes. But I don't hate her. Why? I thought about it. Because I understand why she did it. Daniel looked surprised. That doesn't mean I agree with it. I know. Understanding isn't approval. He nodded. Mom has spent her entire life protecting me. I know, even when I didn't deserve it. I looked at him. That's the problem. What? Sometimes protecting someone from consequences isn't love. He stared at me. Sometimes it's fear. He didn't answer. I continued. She was afraid of losing you. Yes. So she protected you. Yes. But by protecting you, she denied me the truth. He lowered his head. I know. I watched him. Did she do that when you were younger? He looked up. What? Protect you from consequences. He was quiet for several seconds. Yes. Tell me. He leaned back. My father left when I was 11. I know. But you don't know everything. I waited. My parents had been fighting for months. About what? Money, work. My dad wanted to move. My mom didn't. He paused. They argued constantly. I listened. One night, my father left. Did he come back? For a while. Then? He left again. Daniel looked at his hands. The second time, he didn't come back. I felt something tighten in my chest. What did you think? That it was my fault. Why? Because I had heard my parents arguing. He swallowed. I thought, if I had behaved better, maybe they wouldn't have fought. I shook my head. You were 11. I know that now. But you didn't then. No. What did your mother tell you? She told me my father was sick. I frowned. Sick? She didn't want me to hate him. So she softened the truth. Yes. Did you ever find out what really happened? Years later. I looked at him. How did that make you feel? Angry. At your mother? At everyone. He looked toward the window. I spent years believing something that wasn't true. I understood then. The pattern. Evelyn had protected Daniel from painful truths when he was a child. As an adult, she had protected him from painful consequences. The intention might have been love. The result was avoidance. Do you think that's why you hate difficult conversations? I asked. He smiled sadly. Probably. Because you learned that truth hurts. Yes. So you avoid it. Yes. And when you avoid it long enough, you create a bigger problem. He looked at me. Exactly. I nodded. There it was. The pattern. It didn't excuse him. But it explained something. Daniel had learned early that emotional pain was something to escape, rather than face. When his father left, he didn't learn how to process abandonment. He learned to fear it. When our marriage became difficult, he didn't learn how to communicate. He learned to hide. When Vanessa offered him validation, he didn't ask himself what he was really missing. He accepted the escape. Patterns don't disappear simply because we become adults. If we don't examine them, we repeat them. Sometimes with different people. Sometimes in different circumstances. But the same pattern. Why didn't you tell me? I asked. Tell you what? That you were struggling. He looked at me. I was ashamed. Of what? Feeling like I wasn't enough. I frowned. Enough for what? Anything. He took a breath. I had spent years believing I was going to be successful. Then I turned 40 and realized I wasn't where I thought I would be. I almost laughed. You had a good job. I know. A beautiful home. I know. A wife who loved you. I know. Then, what was missing? He looked at me. Me. I said nothing. I didn't know who I was without achievement. That sentence explained more than he probably realized. Daniel had built his identity around being capable. The provider, the successful husband, the dependable son. When he began feeling like he was failing at those things, he didn't know how to tell anyone. Especially me. Because I was the person whose opinion mattered most. You thought I would see you differently, I said. Yes. Why? Because you always believed in me. I looked at him. That's why you should have told me. I know. You thought telling me you were struggling would make me lose respect for you. Yes. Instead, hiding it made you lose my trust. He closed his eyes. I know. I reached across the table, not to comfort him, just to rest my hand on the wood. Daniel, being vulnerable with someone who loves you isn't weakness. I know. No. He looked at me. You need to learn it. He nodded. I do. That evening, we talked for nearly 3 hours. It was the longest conversation we had had in years. Not about the affair, not entirely. We talked about our marriage, about the things we had avoided, about money, work, family, children, our fears, our disappointments, the future. At one point, Daniel asked, "When did you stop believing I would listen?" I thought carefully. About 3 years ago. Why? Because I told you I was unhappy. He frowned. I don't remember. I know. I looked at him. That's why it hurt. He was silent. I told you I felt invisible. His face changed. I don't remember that. I know. Why didn't you remind me? Because I shouldn't have to repeatedly convince my husband that something matters. He nodded. I understand. I told you I needed more time together. I thought you meant vacations. I meant ordinary time. He looked down. I thought providing for us was how I showed love. I know. And you needed presence. Yes. He nodded slowly. We were speaking different languages. Maybe. But I should have asked. Yes. The conversation wasn't magically fixing anything, but something important was happening. We were finally saying the things we had been too afraid to say when they could still have prevented the damage. That was one of the cruelest things about relationships. Sometimes people become honest only after the consequences force them to be. Around midnight, Daniel stood. I should go. I nodded. He reached the door, then turned. Claire? Yes? Can I ask you something? Okay. If we had talked like this 2 years ago, do you think things would have been different? I looked at him. Maybe? He nodded. Maybe. But we didn't. No. And we can't build a future by living inside that question. He smiled faintly. You're right. That's another thing I had to learn. What? Regret can teach you something, but it can't give you back time. He nodded. Good night. Good night. He left. I locked the door, then stood there for a long time. The next morning, I woke up thinking about something my mother once told me. I had been 24. I was complaining about a friend who kept making the same mistake. My mother had said, people will show you who they are, but sometimes you have to watch long enough to believe them. At the time, I thought she meant we should be suspicious of people. Now I understood something different. Patterns matter. One apology means little. A repeated apology, followed by repeated behavior, means even less. But consistent change tells a different story. That was why I wasn't interested in whether Daniel could make a beautiful speech. I wanted to see what he did when there was nothing to gain. Would he remain honest when I wasn't around? Would he continue therapy after the crisis passed? Would he respect my boundaries if I didn't reward him for it? Would he stop asking when I was coming home? Would he become more honest with himself? Those were the questions that mattered. A month later, I visited Evelyn. I hadn't planned to. She had invited me for lunch. I almost declined. Then I thought about what Rachel had said. You don't have to forgive someone on their schedule. I realized something else. Not speaking to Evelyn was also a choice, and I didn't want my choices to be driven entirely by anger. So I went. She had prepared my favorite chicken dish. When I walked into the house, she smiled. Then she stopped herself. I wasn't sure you'd come. Neither was I. She nodded. We sat at the dining table. For several minutes, neither of us touched the food. Then she said, I've replayed that birthday 1,000 times. So have I. I wish I could change it. You can't. I know. I think that's what you need to accept. She looked at me. What? That some consequences don't disappear because we're sorry. Her eyes filled with tears. I know. I don't want you to suffer forever. I know. But I don't want you to pretend it didn't happen. I won't. She nodded. I failed you. I looked at her. Yes. She took a breath. I was so focused on protecting my son that I forgot you were my family too. I swallowed. That was the first time she had said it without defending herself. I accept your apology. She looked up. But I need time before I trust you again. She nodded. I understand. Trust takes time. I know. And I'm not going to pretend everything is normal just because we're sitting here eating lunch. I wouldn't ask you to. I smiled slightly. Good. She smiled too. For the first time in months, the room didn't feel hostile. It felt honest. After lunch, Evelyn walked me to the door. She touched my arm. Claire? Yes? I want you to know something. What? If you decide not to return to Daniel, I will understand. I looked at her. You would? Yes. Even though he's your son? She nodded. He's my son. Then she took a breath. But you're also someone I love. I looked away. Those words hurt. Because once upon a time, I would have believed them without question. Now I understood that love and loyalty weren't always enough. People could love you and still make terrible choices. People could care about you and still hurt you. What mattered was what they did when they realized the harm. "Thank you," I said. She nodded. I walked toward my car. Halfway there, I stopped. I turned around. "Evelyn?" "Yes?" "Don't protect him from me." He frowned. "Why?" "Because if we're ever going to have a healthy relationship again, he needs to experience the consequences of his choices." She nodded slowly. "I won't. And don't protect me from him either." She looked confused. "What do you mean?" "If he needs to hear something difficult, let him hear it." She smiled sadly. "I think you've become stronger." I shook my head. "No." I looked at her. "I think I've become more honest." She nodded. "Maybe that's the same thing." I smiled. "Maybe." That night, I sat in my car before driving away. I looked at Evelyn's house. For years, I had thought family meant protecting one another from pain. Now I understood something different. Sometimes family means telling someone the truth, even when the truth hurts. Sometimes love means allowing someone to experience consequences. Sometimes support means saying, "I love you," and also, "What you did was wrong." Those two things can exist together. I started the engine. As I drove away, I thought about Daniel. I still loved him. That hadn't changed. But I no longer believed love alone was enough to rebuild our marriage. He would need to change. I would need to change. And the relationship itself would need to change. We couldn't go back to the way we were. Because the way we were had brought us here. It would have to be built differently. Not on assumptions, not on silence, not on fear, not on one person doing all the emotional work, but on two people willing to tell the truth before the truth became a crisis. For the first time, I wasn't afraid of what that future might look like. Because whether Daniel was in it or not, I knew I would finally be in my own life too. Before we move into the next chapter, I want to ask you something. If you were Claire, could you forgive a mother-in-law who knew about the affair for months, protected her son, and then deliberately seated his mistress beside him at your birthday dinner? Would you forgive her because she eventually apologized? Or would that betrayal be too difficult to forget? Tell me what you would do in the comments. I genuinely want to hear your perspective. And if Claire's journey is reminding you that understanding someone's pain doesn't mean excusing their actions, please take a moment to like this story and subscribe to Love Stories by Mr. Johnson, because we're not at the end yet. Claire has finally begun to understand why Daniel betrayed her, but now she has to face something even harder. Can she learn to live without the man she spent 12 years building her life around? Let's continue. The first night I slept in my own apartment, I made the mistake of looking at the clock. 11:42 p.m. I was lying on my back, staring at the ceiling. The room was dark except for the light from the street outside. I turned toward the other side of the bed. Empty. I turned back. Then I checked the clock again. 11:43. 1 minute. It felt like an hour. I had spent 12 years sleeping beside Daniel. 12 years of hearing him breathe. 12 years of arguing over blankets. 12 years of waking up because he got out of bed. 12 years of knowing that if I reached across the mattress, my hand would eventually find another person. Now there was nothing. Just cold sheets. I pulled the blanket closer to my chin. I told myself I was fine. I wasn't. But I was learning that being unhappy didn't mean I had made the wrong decision. That was one of the hardest lessons of my separation. I had always assumed that if I made the right choice, I would immediately feel better. I thought leaving would bring relief. Instead, it brought grief. Relief and grief could apparently live in the same room. I missed Daniel. I missed the man who had betrayed me. That was the part I couldn't explain to anyone. How could you miss someone who had hurt you? How could you want someone to call you when you were also afraid to see their name on your phone? How could you remember their warmth while knowing exactly how cold their choices had made you feel? But human emotions don't follow courtroom rules. There is no judge inside your heart separating evidence into neat categories. You can love someone and still be angry with them. You can forgive someone and still need distance. You can miss someone and still know that being with them isn't healthy yet. I was learning to live inside those contradictions. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise. I made coffee. For a moment, I reached for 2 mugs. Then I stopped. I looked at the second mug. I had made coffee for Daniel almost every morning for 12 years. Sometimes he drank it immediately. Sometimes he forgot about it until it was cold. Sometimes he would kiss my forehead and say, "You're the best." Sometimes he wouldn't say anything. I had never considered the difference. I simply kept making it. I put the second mug back in the cabinet. Then I stood in the kitchen holding my own cup. It was such a small thing, but it felt strangely significant. For the first time, I was making coffee for one person. Me. I sat at the table. My apartment was quiet. There were no dishes waiting to be washed. No laundry belonging to two people. No shoes beside the door. No mail addressed to Daniel. No reminders about his meetings. No grocery list containing his favorite cereal. Nothing. And I realized that I had spent so many years organizing my life around another person that I didn't know what my own ordinary life looked like anymore. That frightened me. Then, it challenged me. A week later, I went back to work. People knew something had happened. Nobody knew exactly what. I had told only 2 close friends. The rest simply noticed that my wedding ring was gone. People are observant in ways they don't admit. My coworker, Melissa, approached me during lunch. "You okay?" I smiled. "Yeah." She gave me a look. "That's your polite answer." I laughed softly. "Maybe." She sat beside me. "You don't have to tell me anything." "I know." She opened her lunch. After a few minutes she said, "But, if you want to talk, I'm here." I looked at her. "Thank you." She nodded. Then she changed the subject. That was what I appreciated most. She didn't force me to explain my pain. She didn't turn me into a story. She simply stayed. That reminded me of something Daniel had done years ago. The coffee shop. The terrible day. The way he had sat beside me without demanding an explanation. For a moment, I wondered whether that was why I had loved him so deeply. He had once understood something I was only beginning to understand again. Sometimes people don't need solutions. Sometimes they need presence. I looked at Melissa. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." "Have you ever had to start over?" She smiled. "Several times." "Does it get easier?" She thought about it. "Starting over doesn't get easier." I waited. "You get better at trusting yourself." That sentence stayed with me. That evening, I went for a walk. I passed a small park near my apartment. Children were playing. A father was pushing his daughter on a swing. An elderly couple sat on a bench holding hands. I watched them for a moment. Then I looked away. For years I had imagined growing old with Daniel. A house, maybe grandchildren, Sunday dinners, family photographs, the ordinary future. Now that future was uncertain. I realized I wasn't only grieving my marriage. I was grieving the future I had imagined. That was different. Sometimes when a relationship ends, people mourn the person. But they also mourn the plans, the vacations that will never happen, the house you thought you'd buy, the traditions you imagined creating, the version of yourself you expected to become. I hadn't understood that grief could include things that had never happened, but it could. You can mourn a future that existed only in your imagination, and you still have to let it go. Daniel called that night. I almost didn't answer. Then, I did. "Hello? Hi. How are you?" "Okay." "I wanted to ask how your first week back at work was." "Fine." "That's good." Silence. Then he said, "I miss asking you about your day." I smiled, sadly. "You can still ask." He laughed quietly. "How was your day?" "Long." "What happened?" I told him about a project. He listened, really listened. When I finished, he asked a question. A simple one. But I noticed. He was interested, not because he wanted something, not because he was trying to prove anything. He was simply listening. And I realized how much I had missed that. "Thank you," I said. "For what?" "Listening." There was a pause. "I should have done more of that." "Yes." "I know." We talked for another 15 minutes. Nothing important. Nothing dramatic. Then he said, "I'll let you go." "Okay." "Good night, Claire." "Good night." I ended the call. Then, I sat on my couch. I expected to feel hopeful. Instead, I felt confused, because one good conversation didn't erase 8 months of betrayal. But it did remind me why I had loved him. And that was dangerous. Not because love was bad. Because nostalgia can make us mistake familiarity for evidence of change. I had to learn to separate the two. 3 weeks into my separation, I started going to therapy. The first session was uncomfortable. The therapist asked me, "What do you want?" I laughed. "I don't know." She smiled. "That's okay. I know what I don't want." "What?" "I don't want to feel like this anymore." She nodded. "That's a good beginning." We talked about Daniel, then we talked about me. That surprised me. I had expected therapy to be about fixing my marriage. Instead, it became about understanding myself. Why did I avoid conflict? Why did I feel guilty when I needed something? Why did I equate patience with love? Why did I feel responsible for everyone's emotional comfort? The questions weren't always comfortable. Sometimes I left sessions angry. Sometimes I cried in my car. Sometimes I wanted to quit. But slowly, I began noticing patterns. I had learned as a child that keeping peace made life easier. If people were upset, I tried to fix it. If someone was disappointed, I blamed myself. If there was conflict, I tried to make it disappear. That had followed me into adulthood. I thought being easy to love meant being easy to live with. I thought needing less made me a better partner. But relationships aren't healthy when one person has to become smaller so the other person can remain comfortable. I had done that. Not because Daniel demanded it every time. Sometimes I had done it myself. That realization was painful, but it was also empowering. Because if I had helped create that pattern, I could help break it. One Saturday morning, I decided to do something I hadn't done in years. I went to the bookstore. Not the one where I had met Vanessa. Another one across town. I walked through the aisles slowly. I bought a novel. Then a journal. Then a book about gardening. I didn't know why I bought the gardening book. I had never been interested in gardening. Maybe I wanted to learn something completely unrelated to marriage. Something that belonged only to me. I carried my purchases to the register. The cashier smiled. "Anything else?" I looked around. No. Then I paused. Actually, yes. I walked back. I picked up a small book about painting. I had always wanted to learn. Daniel used to say, I was terrible at drawing. He was probably right. But that didn't matter anymore. I bought it. When I got home, I cleared a small corner near the window. I found some old pencils. Then I sat down. My first drawing was terrible. I laughed. Then I tried again. It was still terrible. I laughed harder. For the first time in months, I laughed when nobody was there to hear me. That mattered. I wasn't performing happiness for anyone. I wasn't trying to prove I was okay. I simply was. For a few minutes. That evening, Daniel texted, "I hope you're having a good weekend." I looked at the message. Then I looked at the terrible drawing on my table. I smiled. I replied, "I am." I bought a painting book. His response came quickly. "You always said you wanted to learn." I stared at the screen. I had forgotten I had ever told him that. He hadn't. He remembered. I typed, "I did." He replied, "I'm glad you're doing something for yourself." I read that sentence twice. There was no question about when I was coming home. No guilt. No emotional pressure. Just encouragement. I put the phone down. That night, I understood something. Healing didn't mean I had to stop loving Daniel. It meant I had to stop making him the center of my emotional universe. I could care about him without monitoring his feelings. I could miss him without running back. I could hope without depending on the outcome. I could love him and still build a life that would be meaningful without him. That was freedom. Not the freedom of not caring. The freedom of caring without disappearing. Months earlier, if someone had told me I would one day sit alone in an apartment painting badly and enjoying myself, I would have laughed. I had thought being alone meant being abandoned. Now, I was beginning to understand that being alone could also mean hearing yourself clearly. The empty side of the bed was still empty. Some nights, I still missed him. Some mornings, I still woke up expecting to hear him in the kitchen. I hadn't magically healed, but I was no longer terrified of the silence. I was learning what my own voice sounded like inside it. And perhaps that was the most important thing I had gained from walking away. Not distance from Daniel. Distance from the version of myself who believed love required her to disappear. One evening, I stood by the bedroom window and looked at the city lights. My phone buzzed. "Daniel. Good night, Claire." I smiled. I typed, "Good night." Then I placed the phone on the nightstand. I didn't wait for another message. I didn't stare at the screen. I didn't wonder what he was doing. I simply turned off the light. And for the first time in 12 years, I fell asleep without needing to know whether someone else was okay. I was finally learning to ask a different question. Was the first? I didn't realize how much of myself I had misplaced until I started finding pieces of her again. It happened slowly. There was no dramatic morning when I woke up and suddenly felt whole. Instead, it was little things. I started listening to music while cooking. I started taking longer walks. I bought flowers simply because I liked them. I stopped checking my phone every few minutes. I began saying no without writing a paragraph in my head explaining why. And, perhaps most importantly, I stopped automatically asking myself what Daniel would think. That was harder than it sounds. For 12 years, almost every decision had passed through the invisible filter of our marriage. Would Daniel like this restaurant? Would Daniel want to go there? Would Daniel think this was too expensive? Would Daniel be tired? Would Daniel be hungry? Would Daniel be upset? Even when he wasn't physically present, he was present in my decision-making. I had mistaken partnership for constant consideration. There was nothing wrong with considering your spouse. The problem was when you stopped considering yourself. I had forgotten that distinction. One Saturday morning, I stood in front of my closet for nearly 20 minutes. It sounds ridiculous, but I couldn't decide what to wear. I pulled out a red dress, then put it back, a black one, then a blue one. Finally, I laughed at myself. Who cares? Nobody answered. I looked at my reflection. I care. That was the answer. I wore the red dress, not because Daniel liked red, not because it was flattering to him, because I liked it. I met Rachel for lunch. She looked at me when I walked in. Okay. What? Who are you? I laughed. What do you mean? You haven't worn that dress in years. I know. Daniel didn't like it. I sat down. Exactly. She smiled. Now you're getting it. I rolled my eyes. But she was right. The dress wasn't important. The choice was. I had spent years avoiding little things because they might create friction. Eventually, I had become so good at avoiding friction that I had also avoided myself. Rachel raised her glass. To the red dress. I laughed. To the red dress. That afternoon, I drove past our old house. I hadn't planned to. I was taking a different route home when I saw the street. For a moment, I slowed down. The house looked exactly the same. The same tree in the front yard. The same mailbox. The same porch. I wondered whether Daniel was inside. Then, I kept driving. I didn't stop. That surprised me. Months earlier, I would have turned around. I would have found an excuse to pass by. I would have wondered who he was with, whether he was eating, whether he was sleeping, whether he missed me. Now, I simply drove home. It wasn't because I stopped caring. It was because I was beginning to understand that knowing everything about another person's life wouldn't necessarily make me feel safer. Sometimes peace comes from accepting that you don't know. My therapist asked me about Daniel during our next session. How often do you talk? Once or twice a week. How do you feel afterward? I thought about it. Usually calm. Usually? Sometimes sad. Why? So, because I still love him. She nodded. Does loving him mean you want to go back? No. Why not? I looked down. Because I don't trust the marriage yet. She smiled slightly. That's an important distinction. What? You've stopped asking, do I love him, and started asking, is this relationship healthy for me? I hadn't noticed, but she was right. For months, I had been trying to answer one question, do I still love Daniel? The answer had always been yes. That wasn't the difficult question. The difficult question was, can the relationship become something healthy enough for me to stay? Love could not answer that alone. Behavior would. Trust would. Time would. Consistency would. I was beginning to understand that relationships are not sustained by feelings alone. Feelings start things. Choices maintain them. One evening, Daniel called while I was cooking. Did I catch you at a bad time? No. What are you making? Something you hate. He laughed. That's a dangerous answer. Eggplant. I knew it. You always hated it. I still do. I smiled. For a moment, it felt normal. Then I realized something. Normal didn't scare me anymore. Before, every pleasant conversation made me nervous. I worried that I was forgetting what happened. That laughing with him meant I was forgiving him too quickly. That missing him meant I was weak. But healing taught me that remembering the betrayal and remembering the love could coexist. I didn't have to erase one to honor the other. How was your day? I asked. He told me. I listened. Then he said, how was yours? I told him about work. He asked questions. Not many. Just enough to show he was paying attention. When we finished talking, neither of us rushed to end the call. Finally he said, I like hearing you talk about your day. I smiled. I used to tell you everything. I know. I wish you had listened more. I wish I had too. There was no defense, no explanation, just regret. I appreciated that. A few weeks later, Daniel asked if I wanted to have dinner. I hesitated. Just dinner, he said. I know. No expectations. I smiled. That's what you said last time. And? You still had expectations. He laughed. Fair. I thought about it. Okay. We chose a small restaurant neither of us had visited before. That mattered to me. I didn't want to return to all our old places yet. Some memories were still too fragile. When Daniel arrived, he looked nervous. I smiled. You look like you're going to a job interview. I feel like I am. Why? Because I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything. He smiled. That's not how dinner works. We sat down. For the first 20 minutes, we talked about ordinary things. Work, traffic, Rachel's obsession with plants, his mother's upcoming doctor's appointment. Then the conversation became more serious. "How are you?" he asked. "Really? Really?" I thought, better. "Good. But not because of you." He nodded. "I understand. I'm saying that because I need you to know." "I do. I've been learning to be okay without you." He looked down. "That's probably a good thing." I studied him. "Why?" "Because if we ever get back together, I don't want you to need me to be okay." That answer surprised me. I didn't know what to say. He continued, "I want you to choose me. Not need me. Choose me." The difference was enormous. I looked down at my plate. For years, I had thought commitment meant needing one another. Now I was beginning to think the healthiest kind of commitment might be two people who could stand independently choosing to stand together. "That's what I want too," I said. After dinner, we walked outside. The evening air was cool. We stopped near the parking lot. Daniel looked at me. "Can I ask you something?" "Yes." "Are you happier now?" I thought carefully. "Some days." He smiled. "That's honest." "Some days I'm sad." "I know." "Some days I miss you." "I know." "Some days I don't." He nodded. "That's okay." I looked at him. "Is it?" "Yes." "You're not hurt by that?" "Of course I am." He smiled sadly. "But your healing isn't supposed to protect my feelings." That sentence stayed with me, because that was another pattern I had carried. I had always wanted my honesty to be painless for other people. I wanted to tell the truth without making anyone uncomfortable. But sometimes truth hurts, and avoiding it only delays the pain. "I appreciate that," I said. He nodded. Then he did something simple. He opened my car door, not because I needed him to, because he wanted to. I smiled. "Good night, Daniel." "Good night." He stepped back. I got into the car. He didn't ask me to stay. He didn't ask when I was coming home. He didn't say he couldn't live without me. He simply let me leave. And somehow, that felt more loving than any desperate promise could have. When I got home, I opened my journal. I wrote, "Today, I realized something." Then, "I don't want a husband who needs me to save him." I paused, then continued, "I want a partner who knows how to save himself and still chooses to walk beside me." I stared at the sentence. It felt right. Daniel's healing was his responsibility. Mine was mine. The marriage, if we rebuilt it, would belong to both of us. That was healthier than what we had before. A month later, I received an unexpected invitation. A women's leadership conference in Chicago. I had wanted to attend for years, but every time it came up, there had been a reason not to go. Daniel's schedule, our budget, family commitments, something. This time, I looked at the invitation and immediately thought, I should ask Daniel. Then I stopped. Why? I wasn't asking permission. I wasn't planning a secret. I simply didn't need permission. I booked the ticket. When I told Daniel, I expected him to be surprised. He was. "Chicago?" "Yes." "For how long?" "4 days." He smiled. "Good. That's it?" "What else should I say?" "I don't know." He laughed. "I'm proud of you." The words made me unexpectedly emotional. "Why?" "Because you wanted to go for years." I smiled. "Yes. And you finally went." I looked down. "Thank you. Have fun." I nodded. "I will." The conference changed something in me. Not dramatically, but enough. I met women who had built businesses after divorce. Women who had started careers at 40. Women who had left relationships. Women who had rebuilt marriages. Women who had chosen to remain single. There was no single definition of a successful life. That realization mattered. For years, I had measured success by whether my marriage survived. Now I understood that my life was bigger than my marriage. Marriage could be part of my happiness. It couldn't be the entire definition of it. On the last evening, I sat alone in my hotel room. The city lights filled the window. I thought about Daniel. I missed him. But I also felt peaceful. That was new. I could miss him without feeling incomplete. I could love him without needing an immediate answer about our future. I could imagine a life with him. And I could imagine a life without him. Neither possibility destroyed me. That was when I knew I had changed. When I returned home, Daniel picked me up from the airport. He was standing near the arrivals area, holding a small bouquet of flowers. I smiled. "You didn't have to do that." "I know." "Why did you?" "Because I wanted to." I took the flowers. "Thank you." He looked at me. How was it? Wonderful. Tell me everything. And I did. I told him about the speakers, the women, the conversations, the things I learned. He listened for nearly 40 minutes. He didn't interrupt. He didn't turn the conversation toward himself. He simply listened. When I finished, he said, "You look happy." "I am," he smiled. "I'm glad." We stood there in the airport. People moved around us. Announcements echoed overhead. Suitcases rolled across the floor. And for the first time, I understood something I had spent years trying to learn. Love isn't proven by how much of yourself you give away. Sometimes, love becomes stronger when two people remain whole. I had spent 12 years believing that being a good wife meant being needed. Now I understood that being a good partner meant being honest. Honest about what I wanted. Honest about what hurt. Honest about what I could forgive. Honest about what I couldn't accept. And honest enough to admit that I still didn't know whether Daniel and I would find our way back to each other. But I no longer needed to know today. For the first time, I trusted myself enough to wait. Not passively, not desperately, just patiently. Because whatever happened next, I knew something I hadn't known before. I would not disappear inside someone else's life again. I had finally found the woman I had forgotten. And I intended to keep her. 6 months after the birthday party, Daniel asked me to meet him at the coffee shop where we had first met. I almost laughed when I saw the message. "Can we talk somewhere that means something to us?" I stared at it for a long time. There were places I had avoided since the affair. Restaurants, hotels, certain streets, even songs. Memories had become landmines. But the coffee shop was different. It had witnessed the beginning of us. Maybe it could witness whatever came next. I replied, "Okay, Saturday at 10. His answer came almost immediately. "I'll be there." I arrived 10 minutes early. The same bell rang above the door when I entered. The same smell of coffee. The same wooden tables. The same window where Daniel had once sat reading. I stood there for a moment, remembering. 12 years earlier, I had walked into this place exhausted and angry about a terrible day at work. A stranger had told me I looked like I was having a terrible day. I had told him I was. He hadn't tried to charm me. He hadn't tried to fix me. He had simply noticed. That was how it started. Now I was standing in the same room, wondering whether two people who had once understood each other so easily could learn to understand each other again. Daniel arrived exactly at 10. He looked nervous. I smiled. "You came early." "So did you." "I wanted coffee." He laughed. "Of course." We ordered, then sat at our old table. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, Daniel said, "I've been thinking about our marriage." "So have I." "I've been thinking about when things changed." I looked at him. "Do you know?" "I think so." "Tell me." He looked down. "I think we stopped being curious about each other." I didn't expect that. "Curious?" "Yes." He looked at me. "When we first met, I wanted to know everything about you." I smiled faintly. "And I wanted to know everything about you." We asked questions. We listened. We talked. We disagreed. And we still wanted to know what the other person thought. I nodded. Then life got busy. "Yes. Work. Family. Money. Responsibilities. Exhaustion. We became efficient." I laughed softly. "Efficient? At marriage? What does that mean?" "We stopped talking about things that didn't need immediate solutions." I frowned. "What do you mean?" "At first, we talked because we wanted to understand each other." He paused. "Later, we talked because there was something that needed to be handled." That hit me. He was right. Our conversations had become practical. "Did you pay the electric bill? What time is your meeting? Are we going to your mother's house Saturday? Did you buy groceries? What time will you be home?" We had become excellent at managing life. We had simply forgotten to live inside it together. "I contributed to that," I said. Daniel looked at me. "How?" "I stopped telling you things." "Why?" "Because I didn't think you wanted to hear them." "I did. I know that now." He looked down. "I wish I'd made that clearer. I wish I'd asked." We sat quietly. Then I said, "Do you remember when I told you about my promotion?" He frowned. "I remember." "No." I shook my head. "You remember that I got passed over?" "Yes." "You don't remember what happened afterward?" He looked confused. "What?" "I came home and told you I was disappointed." "I remember." "You said, 'That sucks.'" He closed his eyes. "I remember." "Then you went back to your phone." He looked at me. "I didn't know." "That's the problem." "What?" "I didn't need you to solve it." I swallowed. "I needed you to care." He nodded slowly. I understand. I kept waiting for you to notice that I was becoming unhappy. Why didn't you tell me? Because I thought you knew. He looked at me. And I thought you were okay because you kept saying you were. I laughed sadly. So we were both waiting for the other person to read our minds. Yes. And neither of us did. No. That was almost funny. Almost. The waitress brought our coffee. Daniel thanked her, then looked at me. I want to tell you something I've learned in therapy. Okay. I thought communication meant talking. It doesn't? Not completely. He paused. I've learned that the communication also means making it safe for someone else to tell you the truth. I looked at him. Explain. If I ask you what's wrong but become defensive when you answer, eventually you'll stop answering. I nodded. That's true. I did that. Sometimes. I would ask what was wrong. Yes. And then when you told me, I'd explain why you were wrong. I smiled faintly. You did. I thought I was defending myself. You were. I didn't realize I was teaching you not to talk. That was a powerful realization. People often say communication is about honesty, but honesty requires safety. If someone tells you how they feel and you punish them for saying it, eventually they stop telling you. Silence, then, looks like peace. But silence isn't always peace. Sometimes it's resignation. I learned something too, I said. What? I used silence as punishment. Daniel looked surprised. Sometimes. I nodded. When I was angry, I wouldn't tell you. Yes. I thought you'd figure it out. I usually didn't. I know. Then I'd make it worse by asking why you were acting strange. I laughed. I thought you were supposed to know. He laughed too. Apparently, I wasn't. The laughter faded. I should have told you when I was hurt. Yes. I should have told you when I felt ignored. Yes. I should have told you when I felt lonely. He nodded. But Daniel. Yes? None of that makes what you did okay. I know. I need you to understand that. I do. Because I'm not going to rebuild this marriage by pretending we were equally responsible for the affair. He looked directly at me. We weren't. I felt something release inside me. He continued. I contributed to the distance. He paused. But I chose betrayal. I nodded. That's the difference. Yes. That was perhaps the most important sentence Daniel had spoken since the affair began. He wasn't minimizing his role. He wasn't using our problems as a defense. He was finally separating explanation from excuse. Can I ask you something difficult? He said, yes. Do you still want me? I looked at him. The question was simple. The answer wasn't, I still love you. He nodded. That's not what I asked. I know. I took a breath. I still want the possibility of you. He looked confused. What does that mean? It means I don't want the man who cheated on me. He nodded. But I don't know whether the man you're becoming is someone I can build a life with. He looked down. That's fair. I don't need promises. I know. I need time. I know. I need consistency. I know. And I need you to understand that even if you do everything right from now on, I may still decide I can't come back. His face tightened. I understand. Do you? He nodded. Yes. Because I don't want you doing all this just to win me back. Then why should I do it? I looked at him. Because it's who you need to become. He sat quietly. Then he nodded. I've been thinking about that too. What? If you never come back, I still need to become a better man. That answer moved me. Not because it guaranteed anything, because it meant his growth was finally becoming separate from my decision. We sat there for another hour. We talked about things we hadn't discussed in years. Children, our financial future, our parents, our individual dreams, the possibility of moving, the possibility of staying, the possibility of divorce. Nothing was off limits. It was uncomfortable, but it was honest. At one point, Daniel asked, why didn't you tell me you wanted to learn painting? Because you once told me I was terrible at drawing. He laughed. You were. I know. I didn't mean you shouldn't do it. I know. I was teasing you. I know. Did you stop because of me? I thought, not completely. I looked down. But maybe. He became quiet. I hate that. What? That I made you smaller without realizing it. I looked at him. You didn't make me smaller alone. He frowned. I helped. Yes. Why? Because I let your opinions become more important than mine. He looked at me. I don't want that anymore. He nodded. Neither do I. When we finally left the coffee shop, we stood outside. The weather was cool. The street was busy. Daniel looked at me. Thank you. For what? For talking to me. I didn't promise anything. I know. Don't mistake conversation for reconciliation. I won't. Good. He smiled. You're very clear now. I had to become. He nodded. I'm glad. I started walking toward my car. Then, he called my name. I turned. Claire. Yes? I loved you when we first met. I didn't say anything. I loved you when we got married. He paused. I loved you when things were good. Another pause. And I loved you when things were bad. I looked at him. But I didn't know how to love you well when I was struggling. My eyes filled with tears. He continued. That's not an excuse. No. It's just the truth. I nodded. I believe you. He looked relieved. But believing you doesn't mean I'm ready. I know. I got into my car. As I drove away, I realized something. For years I had believed that a successful marriage meant avoiding the conversations that might threaten it. Now I understood the opposite. A healthy marriage requires the courage to have the conversations that might temporarily make things uncomfortable. Because avoiding a difficult conversation doesn't protect a relationship. Sometimes it only protects the problem. And our problem had been protected for years, until it became an affair. That evening, I wrote in my journal, we didn't stop loving each other. I paused, then wrote, we stopped knowing how to reach each other. I stared at the sentence, then added, and somewhere along the way, we both became afraid of asking for what we needed. I closed the journal. The next chapter of our lives wasn't going to be built on pretending. If there was going to be another chapter, it would have to be built on difficult conversations. The kind we should have had years ago. The kind that might hurt. The kind that might save us. Or the kind that might finally tell us we were better apart. For the first time, I was ready for either answer. The hardest part of telling the truth is discovering that you are not completely innocent either. I learned that the morning after the coffee shop. For years I had imagined that if Daniel ever betrayed me, the story would be simple. He would be the person who did wrong. I would be the person who was hurt. He would carry the guilt. I would carry the pain. And that would be the end of it. But real life is rarely that clean. I had been hurt. Deeply. Daniel had betrayed me. That was true. But our marriage had also been struggling long before Vanessa entered the picture. And if I wanted to understand what happened, not excuse it but understand it, I had to be honest about my own part. That didn't mean taking responsibility for his affair. It meant taking responsibility for myself. There was a difference. A very important one. That weekend, I went through some of our old emails. I don't know why. Maybe I was looking for evidence. Maybe I was looking for the exact moment everything changed. I found one from 7 years earlier. Daniel had sent it while traveling for work. Miss you. Wish you were here. I smiled. Then I found another, 5 years earlier. Don't forget, dinner Friday. I have a surprise for you. Another, 3 years earlier. Can you call me when you get home? I want to tell you something. I stared at that one. I remembered the night. I had been exhausted. I had seen the message while driving home. I had thought, I'll call him later. I never did. Later became tomorrow. Tomorrow became the weekend. Then something else happened. Life moved on. That was how many of our problems had begun. Not with cruelty. With postponement. We had both become experts at saying, later. Later, when work slowed down. Later, when money wasn't tight. Later, when we weren't tired. Later, when the timing was better. Later, when we felt less angry. But relationships don't pause while people prepare to become better communicators. They continue changing. And ours had changed while we kept waiting for the perfect time to address it. I called Daniel that evening. Can you come over? He hesitated. Are you sure? Yes. He arrived 20 minutes later. He stood in the doorway. What's wrong? Nothing. He smiled faintly. That's usually not a good sign when you say it. I laughed. Come in. We sat in the living room. I had made tea. He looked at the cups. You're still making tea when you're nervous. I didn't know you remembered. I remember a lot. I looked at him. That's part of the problem. He nodded. I know. I took a breath. I've been thinking about what we said yesterday. So have I. I think we need to talk about what we both did wrong. Daniel looked at me carefully. Okay. But there's something I need to make clear first. Go ahead. I'm not saying we both caused the affair. I know. I'm not saying my mistakes justify yours. I know. I'm saying that if we're going to understand why our marriage became what it became, I need to be honest about my own behavior too. He nodded. Okay. I looked down at my tea. I stopped communicating. He didn't interrupt. I started expecting you to notice when something was wrong. He nodded. I became resentful because you didn't. Another nod. I sometimes punished you with silence. He looked at me. Yes, I know. I deserved some of that. No. He shook his head. You were hurt. I was, but I still could have handled it differently. He was quiet. I stopped telling you what I wanted because I was afraid you'd say no. Why would I? Sometimes you did. When? Remember when I wanted to take that trip with my friends? He thought. Yes. You said it wasn't a good time financially. It wasn't. I know. But I felt like I had to choose between being responsible and being happy. He frowned. I didn't know you felt that way. I didn't tell you. He nodded slowly. That's the pattern. Yes. I made decisions based on what I thought was practical. And I silently resented you for them. He smiled sadly. That's not healthy. No. We sat in silence. Then I said, I also stopped being affectionate. He looked at me. Not because I didn't love you. I know. Because I was tired. Of what? Of always initiating. He looked down. I continued. I felt like I was asking for attention all the time. He swallowed. I didn't realize. I know. And instead of telling me, you withdrew. Yes. I should have noticed. Maybe. He nodded. I should have. I shook my head. Daniel, you aren't responsible for reading my mind. He looked at me. But I am responsible for paying attention. Yes. That was the balance we had never found. I had expected him to read my silence. He had accepted my silence as evidence that everything was fine. Neither of us had asked enough questions. What about you? I asked. He leaned back. Where do I start? Anywhere. He took a breath. I stopped being emotionally present. I nodded. I became obsessed with work. Yes. I used work as an excuse to avoid things at home. Yes. I made you feel like your needs were interruptions. I looked down. Yes. I told myself I was providing for us. You were, but I used providing as a substitute for being present. I nodded. I thought if I worked harder, everything else would eventually feel better. It didn't. No. He paused. I also became defensive. Very. He smiled. Very. You couldn't hear criticism without thinking you were being attacked. I know. And sometimes I couldn't tell you I was disappointed without you turning it into a discussion about everything you had done for me. He closed his eyes. I did that. Yes. I hated feeling like I was failing. I know. But I made you pay for my insecurity. He looked at me. That's not fair. No. To either of us. You're right. He continued. I also stopped asking about your dreams. I looked at him. Yes. I knew what you wanted 12 years ago. I smiled sadly. The bookstore. The bookstore. You remembered. Of course. Then why did you stop asking? I got distracted by our life. I nodded. That's how it happens. What? You don't decide to stop knowing someone. You just stop asking. I looked at him. Exactly. We sat together for almost 2 hours. By the end, neither of us was crying. That surprised me. I think we had moved beyond the need to cry. We were simply tired of pretending. Daniel finally said, I wish I could go back. I shook my head. I don't. He looked surprised. Why? Because going back means returning to the people we were. He nodded. And we didn't know what we were doing. No. We loved each other. Yes. But we didn't know how to protect the relationship from ourselves. He looked down. That's painful. It is. But maybe that's what we need to learn. I looked at him. What? How to build something healthier than what we had. I didn't answer immediately, because the idea frightened me. Not because I didn't want it, because the first did, and wanting it made me vulnerable. Later that evening, Daniel stood by the door. Before leaving, he asked, Can I tell you something? Yes. I've spent months thinking the biggest mistake I made was having an affair. I looked at him. Isn't it? It was the biggest betrayal. He paused. But the biggest mistake started earlier. When I became unhappy and decided silence was easier than honesty. I nodded. That's where the real damage began. Yes, but don't misunderstand me. He looked directly at me. Being unhappy didn't give me permission to cheat. I know. I could have told you. Yes. I could have asked for counseling. Yes. I could have left. Yes, I could have done 100 things. He swallowed. I chose the one that hurt you most. I looked at him. That was accountability. Not, I cheated, because we were unhappy. But, we were unhappy, and I still chose to cheat. The difference mattered. It was the difference between explaining behavior and owning it. After he left, I sat alone. I realized something uncomfortable. I had spent months waiting for Daniel to accept responsibility. Now that he had, I had to decide what I would do with that accountability. Because sometimes we ask people to change, and when they do, we become afraid of what that change means for us. If Daniel changed, I could no longer blame his current behavior for staying away. I would have to decide whether the past was something I could eventually move beyond. That decision terrified me. I wasn't ready, but I wasn't close to it either. The next week, Daniel and I began counseling together. Our first session was awkward. We sat on opposite ends of the couch. The therapist asked, "What brings you here?" Daniel looked at me. I looked at him. Finally, I said, "We're trying to find out whether our marriage can survive what happened." The therapist nodded. "Do you both want it to survive?" Daniel said yes, immediately. I hesitated. "I want to know whether it should." The therapist smiled. "That's honest." Daniel looked at me. I reached for his hand. Not because everything was fixed, because I wanted him to know I was willing to try. His fingers closed around mine. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. The therapist said, "That's where we'll begin." Counseling didn't make things easier. It made them more honest. We learned how often we interrupted each other, how quickly we defended ourselves, how easily we misunderstood tone, how often we answered questions with assumptions. We learned to say, "What did you mean?" instead of, "I know what you meant." We learned to say, "That hurt me," instead of, "You always do this." We learned to say, "I need some time," instead of, "Fine." Small changes, but small changes were important. Our marriage had been damaged by hundreds of small decisions. Perhaps healing would also happen through hundreds of small decisions. One evening after counseling, Daniel and I sat in the car. Neither of us started the engine. He looked at me. "Do you think we're getting better?" I smiled. "I think we're getting more honest." "Is that better?" "Sometimes." He laughed. "Fair." I looked out the windshield. "I don't know where this ends." "I know. That scares me." "Me too." I turned toward him. "But I'm not as afraid as I used to be." "Why?" "Because I know I can survive whatever happens." He nodded. "And I know that if we rebuild this, it won't be because I was afraid to leave." He looked at me. "It will be because we both chose to stay." I smiled. "Exactly." He reached for my hand. This time, I took it without hesitation. Not because I had forgotten, not because trust had magically returned, but because I was learning something new. A second chance doesn't mean pretending the first chance wasn't damaged. It means using what you learned to build differently. And for the first time since that birthday party, I wasn't trying to return to the marriage I had lost. I was wondering whether Daniel and I could build a new one where silence wasn't mistaken for peace, where loneliness wasn't hidden behind busy schedules, where problems were discussed before they became secrets, where love wasn't measured by sacrifice alone, and where neither of us had to disappear in order to keep the other person. I didn't know if we would succeed, but I finally knew what I wanted. I didn't want the old Daniel. I didn't want the old Claire. And I didn't want the old marriage. If we were going to love each other again, it had to be with our eyes open. Not because we had forgotten what happened, but because we had finally learned from it. The first thing I learned about rebuilding trust was that it was incredibly boring. There were no dramatic declarations, no orchestra, no rain-soaked reunion, no moment when Daniel looked into my eyes and suddenly everything inside me said, "I believe you." Trust returned quietly. So quietly that sometimes I didn't notice it happening. It looked like Daniel telling me he would call at 7 and calling at 7. It looked like him admitting when he was wrong without waiting for me to point it out. It looked like him telling me when he was struggling instead of disappearing into work. It looked like him putting his phone on the table without me asking. It looked like transparency that didn't feel like surveillance. And perhaps most importantly, it looked like consistency when I wasn't rewarding him for it. That was the difference. Before the affair, Daniel had often been kind when things were easy. Now I was watching to see whether he could remain honest when things were uncomfortable. Because anyone can behave well when they're afraid of losing something. Real change becomes clearer when the crisis starts to fade. We had been in counseling for 3 months. We weren't living together. That decision remained mine. Daniel didn't pressure me. Sometimes I stayed at his house for dinner. Sometimes he came to mine. Sometimes we spent an entire weekend together. Then I went home alone. At first, that arrangement felt strange. Then, it became normal. I liked having my own space. I liked waking up and deciding how I wanted my morning to look. I liked that Daniel and I could spend time together without pretending we had already solved everything. One Saturday, we went grocery shopping. It was the most ordinary thing in the world. Yet halfway through the store, I realized I was happy. Daniel was pushing the cart. I was choosing vegetables. He held up 2 different brands of coffee. Which one? The one you like. That's not helpful. Then buy both. He laughed. We're not made of money. I looked at him. Look who's finally learning. He smiled. Very funny. We continued walking. At the cereal aisle, he picked up the brand I used to buy. Then stopped. Do you still like this? I smiled. I do. He put it in the cart. Such a tiny moment. But I noticed. He hadn't assumed. He had asked. That was what change looked like. Not grand gestures. Curiosity. Later that afternoon, we sat on the back porch. Daniel looked at me. Can I ask you something? Sure. Do you feel safer with me now? I thought about it. A little. He nodded. That's good. But safety isn't just about whether you're cheating. I know. It's about whether I can tell you the truth without being punished for it. He looked at me. Do you feel like you can? More than before. What can I do better? I smiled. You can't ask me that every day. He laughed. Why? Because eventually I'll start feeling like your teacher. He nodded. Fair. I continued. Sometimes you need to notice without asking. Okay. And sometimes I need to tell you instead of expecting you to notice. That's fair too. We smiled at each other. That was one of the first times our conversation felt balanced. I wasn't carrying all the emotional responsibility, neither was he. We were both participating. One night, Daniel came home from work, visibly frustrated. He threw his keys on the counter. I looked at him. Bad day? He sighed. Terrible. What happened? My boss criticized the project. Are you angry? Yes. At him? Mostly. I waited. Then he said, and at myself. Why? I think he's right. I looked at him. You think you made a mistake? Yes. Do you want to talk about it? He nodded. We sat down. He explained what happened. I listened. Then he said, I almost called Vanessa. My body went still. The old fear returned instantly. He saw my face. I didn't. I swallowed. Why did you almost call her? Because she used to make me feel better when I was insecure. I stared at him. And what did you do instead? I called my therapist. I felt something inside me shift. Not because he had called the therapist, because he had told me. He could have kept that thought to himself. He didn't. I appreciate you telling me. I don't want secrets anymore. I nodded. That was difficult honesty, the kind that mattered. But healing wasn't always graceful. One evening, Daniel came home late. He had said he would be there by 6. He arrived at 8. I immediately felt my chest tighten. Where were you? Work ran late. You didn't call. I know. Why? I was in a meeting. I felt the old anger rising. You could have texted. I should have. Yes. He sighed. I forgot. Something inside me snapped. How convenient. He looked at me. What does that mean? It means you always have a reason. He became defensive. I said I forgot. And I'm supposed to believe you. He stared at me. Claire, what? I made a mistake. I know, but you're talking to me like I'm lying. I stopped. He was right. I was reacting to the past, not the present, but the past was still inside me. That was another part of rebuilding trust nobody warned me about. Sometimes the current person gets punished for what the former version of them did. I took a breath. I'm sorry. Daniel looked surprised. For what? For assuming the worst. He nodded. I'm sorry I didn't call. We stood there. 2 people learning how to have an argument without turning it into a war. Finally he said, Do you want some time? Yes. Okay. He walked into the other room. He didn't slam a door. He didn't leave. He didn't accuse me of being impossible. He gave me space. 20 minutes later, I went to him. I was scared. He looked at me. I know, not angry. I know. I was scared. He nodded. I'm learning to understand the difference. That was growth, not perfection. Growth. A month later, we celebrated our anniversary. Not our wedding anniversary. The anniversary of the day we first met. Daniel asked if I wanted to do anything. I said, let's go somewhere new. So we drove to a small town 2 hours away. We walked through antique stores. We ate lunch at a little cafe. We laughed. We took photographs. At one point, Daniel said, "I forgot what it felt like to have fun with you." I smiled. "You weren't having fun with me?" "Not enough." "That's different." "Yes." We sat on a bench overlooking a river. Daniel looked at me. "I used to think love meant feeling happy all the time." I smiled. "What do you think now?" "I think love means being willing to tell the truth when you're not happy." I looked at him. "That's better." He nodded. "And being willing to hear the truth without running away." I smiled. "Even better." That evening we stayed in a small hotel. Separate beds. That had been my condition. Daniel respected it. We talked until midnight. About our first date. Our wedding. Our worst argument. Our funniest memory. Our biggest regret. At one point, Daniel said, "Do you remember when you broke the lamp?" I laughed. "You pushed me." I did not. "You absolutely did. You backed into it. You were arguing with me." I was passionate. "You were annoying." He laughed. The room filled with something I hadn't felt in a long time. Ease. Not certainty. Ease. I looked at him. "I miss this." "Me too." He reached for my hand. I let him. We sat there, quietly. No promises, no demands. Just two people remembering that they had once been friends before they became spouses. That mattered. Because perhaps our marriage had lost something long before it lost trust. We had stopped being curious about each other. We had stopped enjoying each other. We had become partners in responsibilities instead of companions in life. Now we were learning to become friends again. The next morning, I woke before Daniel. I watched him sleep. For years I had looked at him and thought, my husband. That morning, I thought, Daniel. Just Daniel. A person, not a role. Not an obligation. Not someone who belonged to me. And strangely, that made me love him differently. Love is healthier when it isn't ownership. I didn't need him to be mine. I needed him to choose me. And I needed to choose him. Every day. When we returned home, Daniel asked, "Do you want to come home?" I looked at him. He meant our house. Our old house. The one where everything had happened. I shook my head. "Not yet." He nodded. "Okay. You aren't disappointed?" "Of course I am." I smiled. "Thank you for saying that." "Why?" "Because I don't want you pretending you're okay." He laughed softly. "I'll try not to." I nodded. "Neither will I." That was another promise. Not to hide our feelings. Not to use them as weapons. Just to tell the truth. Months passed. The separation became less painful. Not because I stopped remembering. Because the memories stopped controlling me. I could think about the birthday without feeling like I was back in that room. I could think about Vanessa without comparing myself to her. I could think about Evelyn without feeling betrayed all over again. I could think about Daniel without immediately wondering whether he would hurt me. That didn't mean I trusted him completely. It meant fear was no longer making every decision for me. One evening, I found myself standing in our old kitchen. Daniel was cooking. I watched him chop vegetables. He looked over. "What?" "You're staring." I was remembering. "Good memory?" "Mostly." He smiled. "Want to tell me?" I shook my head. "Not yet." "Okay." He returned to cooking. I smiled. He didn't press. That was another small change. Once, he would have asked 3 times. Now he knew that sometimes memories needed space. Later that night, I opened my journal. I wrote, "Trust doesn't return when you stop remembering the betrayal." I paused, then continued, "It returns when the present becomes stronger than the memory." I stared at the words. That was what I was beginning to experience. The past still existed. It always would. But the present was becoming different. Daniel wasn't asking me to forget. He was giving me new experiences to remember. That mattered. One Sunday morning, Daniel asked me to sit beside him. He looked nervous. "What happened?" "Nothing." "That's suspicious." He smiled. "I've been thinking." "About?" "Us." I waited. "I want to ask you something." "What?" "Would you consider moving back home?" My heart began beating faster. I looked at him. He continued quickly. "You don't have to answer now." I smiled. "Good. I don't want to pressure you." "I know. I just want you to know that I'm ready whenever you are." I looked around the room. Our house, our life. For the first time, I didn't see only the memories. I saw possibility, not certainty. Possibility, and that was enough. "I'll think about it," I said. Daniel smiled. "Okay." He didn't ask again. He didn't need to, because this time, the decision would be mine. And whatever I decided, it would not be because I was afraid to be alone. It would be because I had finally learned how to stand on my own. That was the difference between staying because you need someone and staying because, after everything, you still choose them. I didn't answer Daniel's question for 3 days, not because I didn't know what I wanted, because I wanted to make sure the answer wasn't coming from fear. That distinction had become important to me. I had spent years making decisions because I was afraid of conflict, afraid of disappointing people, afraid of being alone, afraid that if I asked for too much, someone would leave. This time, I wanted to make a decision from a different place, peace. So I waited. On the 4th morning, I called Daniel. Hi. Hi. Are you busy? No. Can I come over? There was a pause. Of course. I drove to the house that had once felt like mine, then felt like his, then felt like a place I couldn't enter without remembering the worst night of my life. I stood outside for a moment before knocking. Daniel opened the door. He didn't smile immediately. He looked nervous. Come in. I stepped inside. Nothing had changed. The couch, the photographs, the lamp, the kitchen. But somehow, it looked different. Maybe because I was different. We sat down. Daniel waited. I took a breath. I've been thinking about what you asked. He nodded. I know. I want to come home. His eyes filled with tears. But he didn't move. He didn't celebrate. He simply looked at me. Are you sure? I nodded. Yes. Why? I smiled faintly. Because I want to. He swallowed. Not because you're afraid. No. Not because you're lonely. No. Not because you feel guilty. No. Then why? I looked around the room. Because I believe we have a chance to build something better than what we had. He closed his eyes for a moment. Thank you. But I need something. Anything. No. I shook my head. Not anything. I looked at him. Specific things. He nodded. Tell me. Honesty. Yes. Transparency. Yes. Communication. Yes. And if either of us becomes unhappy, we say it. Yes. Before it becomes resentment. Yes. Before it becomes distance. Yes. And before another person becomes involved. His eyes lowered. Yes. I watched him. Can you promise that? I can promise to tell you the truth. Even when the truth is uncomfortable. Especially then. I nodded. That's what I need. Moving back home was not romantic. There was no dramatic reunion, no champagne, no family gathering, no announcement. I carried 2 suitcases from Rachel's house. Daniel helped me unpack. That was it. My clothes returned to the closet. My books returned to the shelf. My shoes returned to the bedroom. The small things I had taken with me came home. But I noticed something. I didn't feel like I was returning to my old life. I felt like I was entering a new one. We had rules. Not rigid rules. Healthy boundaries. We agreed to have one evening every week where we talked without phones. We agreed that if either of us was upset, we wouldn't use silence as punishment. We agreed to tell the truth before resentment had time to grow. We agreed to continue counseling. And we agreed that neither of us would treat the marriage as something guaranteed. Not because we wanted to live in fear. Because we wanted to live with appreciation. The first night back, I stood in the bedroom doorway. Daniel was already in bed. He looked at me. You okay? Yes. Are you nervous? Very. He smiled. Me too. I climbed into bed. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then Daniel said, Good night. Good night. He turned off the light. I stared into the darkness. The empty side of the bed was no longer empty. But that didn't mean everything was fixed. In fact, I realized something important. Coming home was not the end of the story. It was the beginning of the hardest part. Now, we had to live differently. It was easy to behave well while separated. There was distance. There were consequences. There was fear. But ordinary married life would test us differently. Bills, work, fatigue, family, bad moods, misunderstandings, the little irritations that had once seemed harmless. This time, we couldn't let them become silent walls. 3 weeks after I returned, we had our first real argument. It was about something ridiculous. The dishwasher. I had asked Daniel to unload it. He forgot. I came home tired and saw it still full. You forgot again. He looked up. I was busy. So was I. He sighed. I said I'd do it. You always say that. He stopped. I stopped. The sentence hung in the air. You always say that. It was an old sentence. A dangerous one. The kind that turned one forgotten chore into 12 years of resentment. Daniel took a breath. You're right. I looked at him. I am? Yes. I didn't expect that. He smiled. I know. He stood up. I'm going to unload it. I laughed. That's not the point. I know. He came toward me. The point is that you feel like you can't rely on me. I nodded. Sometimes? Then tell me. I just did. No. He looked at me. Tell me before you're angry enough to say, always. I stared at him. He was right. I smiled. Okay. Okay. He kissed my forehead, then went to unload the dishwasher. I stood there. It was such a small moment, but it felt enormous. We had taken an ordinary disagreement and prevented it from becoming a history lesson. That was progress. A month later, Daniel came home looking upset. I immediately noticed. What's wrong? He sat down. I got bad news. What happened? My promotion was delayed. I waited. He looked embarrassed. I feel like a failure. I sat beside him. You aren't. I know that's what you're going to say. Because it's true. He looked at me. I was afraid to tell you. My chest tightened. Why? Because this was the kind of thing that used to make me feel inadequate. I took his hand. And what are you doing now? I'm telling you. That's right. He smiled. That's progress. Yes. He leaned back. I don't want to hide anymore. I squeezed his hand. Then don't. That was one of the most intimate moments we'd shared in months. Not sex. Not romance. Truth. He had finally learned to bring his insecurity home instead of taking it somewhere else. And I had finally learned to listen without trying to immediately fix everything. Not every day was good. Some days, I still remembered. Sometimes I woke up from a dream about the birthday party. Sometimes I saw a message from an unfamiliar number on Daniel's phone and felt my stomach tighten. Sometimes a song would bring back a memory I wasn't ready for. Healing wasn't linear. I used to think progress meant never feeling pain again. Now I understood that progress could mean feeling the pain and knowing what to do with it. One evening, I told Daniel, I'm having a bad day. He looked at me. Do you want to talk about it? No. Okay. He didn't take it personally. He simply sat beside me. After a few minutes, I leaned against his shoulder. He didn't say anything. Neither did I. We just sat there. That was enough. Our families noticed the difference. Evelyn was careful around me. She didn't ask whether everything was perfect. She didn't interfere. She apologized again, once. Then, she stopped talking about it. That mattered. Sometimes, people think apologizing means repeatedly discussing what they did. But after a sincere apology, the next step is changed behavior. Evelyn began doing that. She stopped defending Daniel. If he made a mistake, she didn't explain it away. She stopped treating him like a child who needed protection from consequences. She allowed him to be an adult. That changed their relationship too. Daniel became more independent. Evelyn became less controlling. And slowly, their relationship became healthier. It reminded me that family systems can change when one person stops playing the role everyone expects. One Sunday afternoon, I found myself sitting at the head table at another family gathering. For a second, my heart raced. The memory of the birthday came back. Vanessa, the empty chair, Daniel beside her, Evelyn watching. I took a breath. Daniel noticed. You okay? I nodded, just remembering. He reached for my hand. Do you want to leave? I looked around, then smiled. No. Are you sure? Yes. I squeezed his hand. This memory doesn't own me anymore. He looked at me. I love you. I smiled. I know. That was enough. Months later, Daniel and I went back to the coffee shop. The same one. The place where everything began. We ordered our usual drinks, then sat by the window. Daniel looked at me. Do you remember what you said the first time we met? I laughed. No. You said you were having a terrible day. I probably was. You were. And what did you say? I asked if I could make it better. I smiled. You failed. He laughed. I know. We sat quietly. Then I said, maybe that's the lesson. What? You don't always have to make someone's pain disappear. He looked at me. Sometimes you just have to sit with them. He nodded. I wish I'd understood that sooner. So do I. We watched people walk past the window. For a moment, I thought about the woman I had been 12 years earlier. She had walked into this coffee shop looking for nothing. She had met a man who noticed her. She had fallen in love. She had built a marriage. She had lost her sense of herself. She had been betrayed. She had walked away. She had learned to live alone. Then she had learned to love again. Not blindly, not desperately, Consciously, I looked at Daniel. I don't want to forget what happened. He nodded. Neither do I. Not because I want to punish you. I know. Because I never want us to become those people again. He took my hand. We won't. I smiled. You can't promise that. He laughed softly. You're right. I squeezed his hand. We can only promise to keep choosing differently. He nodded. On the drive home, I thought about the title of the story I had once imagined telling. The Woman Who Walked Away. It had sounded like a story about leaving. But now, I understood it differently. Walking away had not been about punishing Daniel. It had been about finding myself. And coming back had not been about forgetting what happened. It had been about returning as a different woman. A woman who knew her worth. A woman who could communicate. A woman who could say no. A woman who could leave if she needed to. A woman who could love deeply without abandoning herself. That was the real second chance. Not getting the old marriage back. Getting the chance to build something healthier. Something honest. Something imperfect. Something real. And as Daniel reached for my hand while we drove home, I looked at him. Then, at the road ahead. For the first time, I wasn't thinking about where we'd been. I was thinking about where we were going. Together. But this time, with both of us awake. A year after the birthday party, I woke up before Daniel. The room was still dark. For a moment, I didn't know where I was. Then, I heard his breathing beside me. I turned my head. Daniel was asleep. One arm resting across the pillow. I smiled. Then I remembered the date. October 14th. 1 year. 1 year since I had stood at Evelyn's birthday dinner, and realized that the woman seated beside my husband was the woman he had been seeing. 1 year since I had quietly stood up. 1 year since I had walked away without screaming, without throwing anything, without asking anyone to stop me. 1 year since I had chosen myself. I looked at the clock. 5:47 a.m. I slipped out of bed. In the kitchen, I made coffee. 2 cups. I smiled at the small ritual. A year earlier, I had stood alone in another kitchen making 1 cup. Now, I was making 2. But the meaning was different. Then, I had been trying to learn how to live without Daniel. Now, I was learning how to live with him, without losing myself. That distinction had taken me a year to understand. Daniel walked into the kitchen. You're awake early. So are you. I smelled coffee. I smiled. Of course. He kissed my forehead, then looked at me. What day is it? I stared at him. You know. He nodded. I do. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he said, Do you want to talk about it? I took a breath. Yes. We sat at the table. The same kitchen table where we'd had difficult conversations. The same table where we'd laughed. The same table where we'd once planned vacations and budgets and futures. Now it held 2 cups of coffee and a year of history. I remember everything, I said. Me too. I remember walking into the room. Yes. I remember seeing her. Yes. I remember your mother's face. He looked down. I remember yours. I swallowed. I remember feeling like the floor disappeared. Daniel reached across the table. Can I hold your hand? I nodded. He did. I remember thinking my marriage was over. He squeezed my hand. I thought so too. I looked at him. Did you? That night? Yes. I thought I'd lost you. I looked down. You had. He nodded. I know. We didn't spend the anniversary celebrating. We spent it remembering. There was something important about that. We didn't pretend the night had never happened. We didn't call it a blessing. We didn't say the affair had made us stronger. Some pain doesn't need a silver lining. Sometimes something terrible happens. And the healthiest thing you can say is simply, it was terrible. But you survived it. You learned from it. And you kept living. That was enough. After breakfast, Daniel asked, Do you want to go somewhere? Where? Anywhere. I thought about it. The river. We drove there. The same river where we had celebrated our 5th anniversary. The same place where we had once promised we'd always choose each other. We walked along the water. For a while, neither of us spoke. Then Daniel said, I've been thinking about promises. I looked at him. What about them? I used to think making a promise was the important part. And now? Keeping it. I nodded. Promises are easy when everything is good. Yes. They matter more when keeping them becomes difficult. He stopped walking. I broke the biggest promise I ever made. I looked at him. Yes. I can't undo that. No. But I can spend the rest of my life making different choices. I smiled. Don't make it about the rest of your life. He frowned. What do you mean? That's too big. I looked at him. Just make the right choice today. He nodded. Today? Then tomorrow. Then tomorrow. That's how trust works. He smiled. One day at a time. We sat on a bench overlooking the river. Daniel turned toward me. Can I ask you something? Yes. Do you trust me completely? I smiled. No. He nodded. I expected that. But I trust you more. How much more? Enough. Enough for what? I looked at him. Enough to sleep beside you without checking your phone. He smiled. That's significant. It is. Enough to travel without wondering what you're doing. Yes. Enough to disagree with you without thinking you'll run away. Yes. Enough to believe you when you tell me something difficult. He nodded. That's a lot. It took a year. I know. And there are still days when I struggle. I know. He looked at me. Do you think you'll ever completely forget? No. He looked down. I don't want you to. That surprised me. Why? Because forgetting would mean we didn't learn anything. I squeezed his hand. Exactly. We went home that afternoon. Evelyn had invited us for dinner. I almost declined. Then I changed my mind. I didn't want to spend the anniversary hiding from the family. I wanted to see how far we had come. When we arrived, Evelyn opened the door. She looked at me, then at Daniel. Come in. She hugged me. It wasn't awkward. It wasn't forced. It was simply a hug. That mattered. During dinner, the conversation stayed ordinary. Work, travel, food, the weather. Nobody mentioned Vanessa. Nobody needed to. The past was there, but it didn't control the room anymore. After dinner, Evelyn asked me to help her in the kitchen. While we washed dishes, she said, I think about that night sometimes. So do I. I wish I could change it. I know. I've learned something. What? Protecting someone from consequences doesn't protect them. I looked at her. She continued, sometimes it only delays their growth. I nodded. That's true. She dried a plate. I should have trusted Daniel to face what he had done. Yes. And I should have trusted you enough to tell you the truth. I looked at her. Yes. She smiled sadly. I was afraid. I know. But I'm not afraid anymore. I smiled. Good. She touched my hand. Thank you for giving me another chance. I nodded. Thank you for becoming someone I can trust again. We hugged. There was no dramatic forgiveness, no tears, just two women standing in a kitchen, trying. Sometimes that was enough. Later that night, Daniel and I drove home. He was quiet. What are you thinking about? Mom, what about her? She seems different. She is. So are you. I smiled. Yes. So am I. I looked at him. That's the strangest part. What? We spent a year trying to repair our marriage. He waited. And we ended up changing as individuals. He nodded. Maybe that's what we needed. Maybe. When we got home, I opened the drawer beside the bed. The wedding ring was still there. I had taken it out months earlier, but I hadn't worn it every day. That evening, I picked it up. Daniel watched me. Are you okay? Yes. I looked at the ring. For years, I had believed the ring represented the promise Daniel made. Now I understood that it represented the promise we both chose to keep. I slipped it onto my finger. Daniel's eyes filled with tears, but he didn't say anything. He didn't celebrate. He didn't touch it. He simply looked at me. I smiled. I chose this. He nodded. I know. Not because I'm forgetting. I know. Because I'm choosing again. He reached for my hand. I'll never take that for granted. I smiled. Don't promise. He laughed softly. Right. Show me. I will. That night, we lay in bed. The same bed. The same room. But not the same marriage. I turned toward Daniel. Do you remember what you said at our wedding? He smiled. Something about loving you forever. Yes. I meant it. I know, but I didn't understand what forever required. I looked at him. What does it require? He thought. Attention. I nodded. Honesty. Yes. Humility. Yes. Curiosity. Yes. And choosing each other when it's easier not to. I smiled. That's the one? He reached for my hand. I held it. We lay there quietly. No perfect ending. No guarantee. Just two people who had learned something difficult. Love isn't protected by promises alone. It's protected by attention, by honesty, by boundaries, by accountability, by the willingness to have difficult conversations before resentment becomes distance. And, perhaps most importantly, by remembering that the person you love is still a person. They need to be heard, seen, respected, chosen, not assumed. I closed my eyes. The memory of that birthday party returned one last time. The table, the candles, the laughter, the woman sitting beside my husband's silence, my decision to walk away. But this time, I remembered something else. I remembered the woman who walked out. She had been devastated, but she had also been brave. She didn't know where she was going. She only knew she couldn't stay in a place where her dignity was being ignored. That woman had saved me. I owed her something, not regret, gratitude, because if she hadn't walked away that night, I might never have learned how to come back differently. I opened my eyes. Daniel was asleep. I watched him for a moment. Then I whispered, "Thank you." Not for the betrayal, never for that. For the fact that, after everything, we had both been willing to face the truth. And sometimes, that was the closest thing to redemption people could offer each other. Not perfection. Not forgetting. Just the courage to become better than the people they had been. I turned off the light. And this time, when I reached across the mattress, I wasn't checking whether Daniel was there. I already knew. I was simply holding his hand. The year after the birthday party taught me something I hadn't understood when I was younger. A marriage isn't saved by one perfect conversation. It isn't saved by a beautiful apology. It isn't saved because two people still love each other. A marriage is saved, if it can be saved at all, by what happens after the apology. By what people do when nobody is watching. By the habits they build. By the truths they stop avoiding. By the boundaries they respect. By the courage to admit when something is wrong before it becomes something impossible to repair. Daniel and I were learning all of that slowly. Some lessons came easily. Others didn't. There were still disagreements. There were still days when I felt insecure. There were still moments when Daniel became defensive. There were still times when one of us needed to step away and breathe. But there was one thing we no longer did. We didn't pretend. That changed everything. 6 months after our anniversary, Daniel came home late. He looked exhausted. I was reading on the couch. He dropped his keys on the table. Long day? Very. I closed my book. What happened? My department lost a client. That's serious. Yes. He sat beside me. Then he looked at me. I was angry. At who? My boss. Did you say anything? Yes. I smiled. What did you say? I told him I thought the decision was unfair. How did he respond? He disagreed. And? I went home. I laughed. That's progress. He smiled. The old me would have stayed and argued for an hour. The old you liked winning. I still do. At least you're honest. He laughed. Then he became quiet. I wanted to call you. Why didn't you? I thought you might be tired. I smiled. You could have called. I know. He paused. I still have to learn that I don't have to handle everything alone. I looked at him. Neither do I. He smiled. That was the kind of conversation we had learned to have. Small, ordinary, but meaningful. A few weeks later, I received a message from Vanessa. I stared at her name. For a moment, my heart tightened. Then I opened it. I hope you're doing well. I heard you and Daniel are working things out. I'm glad. I read it twice. Then I deleted the message. Not because I was angry, because there was nothing left to say. That was another sign of healing. I didn't need closure from her anymore. I didn't need to know whether she regretted everything. I didn't need her to validate my worth. I didn't need her to tell me that I had been better. My worth had never been the issue. Her choices were hers. Daniel's choices were his. Mine were mine. That was enough. One Saturday, Rachel came over. She sat on the couch and looked around the house. You two seem different. We are. Better? I smiled. Different. She laughed. That's not an answer. It's the honest answer. She looked at me. Do you trust him? More. Do you think he'll ever hurt you again? I thought carefully. I don't know. She raised an eyebrow. That's terrifying. It is. Then why stay? I smiled. Because certainty doesn't exist. She frowned. Explain. Even before the affair, I didn't have a guarantee that Daniel would never hurt me. That's different. It is. I nodded. But I had to learn that love isn't about finding someone who can guarantee you will never be hurt. I paused. It's about choosing someone whose actions give you good reason to trust them. Rachel thought about it. And if that changes, then I choose again. She nodded slowly. You're not afraid anymore. I am, she smiled. But you're not controlled by it. I looked at her. That's the difference. That evening, Daniel and I went for a walk. The sun was setting. He held my hand. I've been thinking about what Rachel said. What did she say? That I seem different. I smiled. She told me that too. What did you say? That the first AM. He looked at me. I think we both are. Yes. We walked silently for a while. Then Daniel said, I don't want you to think the affair was necessary for us to become better. I looked at him. I don't. Good. Because I would never call it a blessing. He nodded. Neither would I. We could have learned these lessons without destroying each other's trust. Yes. I wish we had. So do I. That was important. We didn't need to romanticize the pain. Sometimes people tell themselves terrible experiences happen for a reason because it makes them easier to accept. But not every painful experience needs to be justified. Some things are simply wrong. What matters is what you do afterward. You can learn from pain without pretending the pain was necessary. A year and a half after the birthday party, Daniel and I took our first real vacation together since everything happened. We went to Maine. No family, no work, no responsibilities. Just 4 days. On the first morning, we walked along the coast. The air was cold. Daniel held his jacket around me. I smiled. You're going to freeze. I'll survive. You always say that. Because it's true. We laughed. Then we stopped near the water. Daniel looked at me. Do you ever think about leaving again? I considered the question. Sometimes. He nodded. That's honest. I think about what my life would look like if I'd stayed gone. What do you imagine? Different. Better? Not necessarily. Worse? Not necessarily. He smiled. So you're saying you don't know? Exactly. He nodded. Good. I looked at him. Why good? Because I don't want you to stay because you think you have no other options. I squeezed his hand. I don't. He looked at me. I know. That was perhaps the greatest gift he could give me. The knowledge that I could leave, and the freedom to choose not to. On the last night of the trip, we sat on the balcony of our hotel room. Daniel looked at the ocean. I used to think losing you would be the worst thing that could happen to me. I looked at him. And now? Now I think becoming the kind of man who could lose you because I refuse to change would be worse. I smiled. That's different. Yes. He looked at me. I don't want you to stay because you're afraid of leaving. I won't. I don't want you to stay because we've been married for so long. I won't. I don't want you to stay because other people expect you to. I won't. Then why? I thought about it. Because I still love you. He smiled. And? Because I like who we are becoming. He nodded. That's enough. When we returned home, ordinary life resumed. Laundry, bills, work, groceries, family dinners, traffic, emails, nothing cinematic. And that was exactly what I wanted. Because I had learned that real love wasn't always found in dramatic moments. Sometimes it was a man remembering to buy the coffee you like. Sometimes it was a woman saying, I'm upset, instead of pretending she wasn't. Sometimes it was turning off the phone during dinner. Sometimes it was asking, how are you really doing? And actually waiting for the answer. Sometimes it was saying, I was wrong, without adding a sentence afterward. Sometimes it was knowing when to give someone space. Sometimes it was choosing to stay. And sometimes it was knowing that you could leave. One evening, almost 2 years after the birthday, I was cleaning out an old drawer. I found the photograph from our first Christmas, the one Daniel had given me at the coffee shop. I turned it over, first of many. I smiled. Then I found another photograph. The birthday party. Someone had taken it before everything happened. I was sitting at the table, Daniel beside me, Evelyn across from us. Everyone was smiling. Vanessa wasn't in the picture. She hadn't arrived yet. I stared at it. There was something unsettling about looking at a photograph from a moment before your life changed. Everyone looked happy. Nobody in the picture knew what was coming. That was the strange thing about photographs. They freeze appearances. They don't capture the secrets. They don't show what someone is thinking. They don't record the conversation that happens after the camera is turned off. They preserve a moment, not the truth behind it. I put the photograph down. Then I picked up the one from our first Christmas. I placed them side by side. One represented the beginning. The other represented the life we had almost lost. Neither photograph told the whole story. Neither ever could. I put both back in the drawer. That night, Daniel asked me, what are you doing? Looking at old photographs. Anything interesting? Everything. He smiled. That's dangerous. Why? You always get emotional. Maybe. He sat beside me. I showed him the photographs. He looked at them. Wow. That's what I said. We sat quietly. Then he pointed at the birthday photograph. I hate that picture. Why? Because we all look happy. I looked at him. We were happy. At that moment. Yes. He nodded. I used to think happiness meant nothing bad was happening. I smiled. And now? Now I think happiness is knowing something bad could happen and still choosing to live honestly. I looked at him. That's a good lesson. He laughed. Therapy. Definitely therapy. We laughed. Then I rested my head against his shoulder. Later that night, I wrote one final entry in my journal. I wrote, slowly. 2 years ago, I thought walking away meant I had lost my marriage. I paused, then continued. Now I understand that walking away was the first time I stopped losing myself. I stared at the sentence. Then, I don't know whether every marriage can survive betrayal. Some shouldn't. Some people change. Some don't. Some couples rebuild. Some discover that love isn't enough to make a healthy relationship possible. Then I wrote, but I know this. Staying should be a choice, not a fear. Leaving should be a choice, not a punishment. And forgiveness should be something you give yourself before you give it to anyone else. I put down the pen. Daniel was standing in the doorway. Done? Yes. What did you write? I smiled. Something for me. He nodded. Good. He walked over. He didn't ask to read it. That was another small sign of change. He trusted that some things belonged only to me. I closed the journal, then took his hand. We walked upstairs together, not because the story had become perfect. It hadn't. We still had disagreements. We still had fears. We still had memories. But we had learned something more important than perfection. We had learned how to face discomfort without running. How to speak before silence became distance. How to ask instead of assume. How to listen without preparing a defense. How to apologize without demanding immediate forgiveness. How to love without making promises we couldn't guarantee. And how to choose each other without pretending that choosing meant certainty. Sometimes I still think about that birthday party. I remember the moment I saw Vanessa sitting beside Daniel. I remember the humiliation. I remember the silence. I remember standing. I remember walking away. For a long time I thought that was the moment my marriage ended. Now, I see it differently. It was the moment my old understanding of love ended. The belief that love meant staying no matter what. The belief that silence was peace. The belief that being needed was the same as being valued. The belief that forgiveness meant forgetting. The belief that leaving meant failure. I don't believe those things anymore. I know now that love requires honesty. That commitment requires choice. That trust is earned slowly. That boundaries are not walls. That vulnerability is not weakness. That accountability is not punishment. And that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is walk away long enough to hear your own voice. I did. And when I finally heard it, I realized something. I hadn't walked away because I stopped loving Daniel. I walked away because I needed to remember that I loved myself too. And when I came back, I didn't come back as the woman who had left. I came back as the woman who finally understood her worth. That changed the marriage. But more importantly, it changed me. 2 years after the night I walked away from Evelyn's birthday party, I found myself standing in the same hallway where it had all begun. Evelyn was hosting another family dinner. This time, there was no surprise waiting for me. No hidden secret. No carefully arranged chair. No woman sitting beside my husband who wasn't supposed to be there. Just family. Ordinary conversation. The smell of food coming from the kitchen. Children laughing in the next room. Daniel standing beside me with one hand resting lightly against my back. I looked around. Everything seemed familiar, but I wasn't the same woman who had stood in this house 2 years earlier. Back then, I had entered believing I knew what my marriage was. That night taught me that knowing someone's routines isn't the same as knowing their heart. I knew when Daniel woke up. I knew what coffee he liked. I knew which shirts he hated ironing. I knew his favorite restaurant. I knew how he took his steak. I knew his mother's birthday. I knew the password to the garage. I knew the sound of his footsteps coming down the hallway. But I hadn't known how lonely he had become. And he hadn't known how lonely I had become either. We had known each other's habits. We had forgotten each other's hearts. That was one of the hardest truths I had carried through the past 2 years. Evelyn came toward us. She smiled. "You're here." I laughed. "Where else would we be?" She hugged me. Then she hugged Daniel. For a moment, I watched them. Mother and son. Their relationship had changed too. Evelyn no longer rushed to protect him from uncomfortable truths. Daniel no longer expected her to. That was something I had once thought impossible. People can change. Not because someone begs them to. Not because someone threatens them. Sometimes they change because they finally become tired of repeating the same patterns. Evelyn looked at me. "Everything okay?" I smiled. "Yes." She nodded. "Good." There was no need to say more. We had all learned to stop filling silence with explanations. Dinner was ordinary, and ordinary felt beautiful. Daniel reached for the serving bowl. "Can you pass me that?" I handed it to him. "Thank you. You forgot to say please." He laughed. "Please?" I smiled. "Better." Across the table, Evelyn laughed. "You two sound like newlyweds." Daniel looked at me. "Lot of practice." "Too much." Everyone laughed, but beneath the laughter was something deeper. We had survived a difficult chapter, not because the chapter wasn't painful, because we had stopped pretending it wasn't. After dinner, I went outside. The evening air was cool. I stood on the porch alone. A few minutes later, Daniel joined me. "You okay?" "Yes." He leaned against the railing. "You've been quiet." "I'm thinking." "About what?" I looked toward the street. "That night." He nodded. "I knew." "You always know when I'm thinking about it." "I've learned." "That's another thing." "What?" "You notice now." He looked at me. "I should have noticed before." "Yes." He nodded. "I can't change that." "No. But I'm grateful you noticed that I notice now." I laughed. "That's a very Daniel sentence." He smiled. We stood quietly. Then he asked, "Do you regret coming back?" The question surprised me. I looked at him. "No." He exhaled. "Good. But I also don't regret leaving." He nodded. "I don't either." That answer mattered, because once upon a time, I had thought walking away meant I had made a mistake. Now I understood that sometimes leaving is what allows people to return differently. Distance had shown me what I needed. It had shown Daniel what he was capable of losing, and it had given both of us enough silence to hear ourselves. "I want to ask you something," Daniel said. "Okay. If you hadn't walked away that night, do you think we'd still be together?" I thought about it. "Probably." He looked surprised. "Really?" "Yes." "Then why did you leave?" "Because staying would have meant accepting a version of marriage I couldn't live with." He nodded. "I understand. I might have stayed for another year. Maybe 5. He looked at me. "But eventually, I would have disappeared." His face changed. "What do you mean?" "I would have become someone who tolerated everything because she was afraid of losing you." He nodded slowly. "I never wanted that." "You didn't know." "I know. And I didn't know either." I looked at him. "That's what walking away gave me." "What?" "Perspective." I thought about the first few weeks after leaving. The empty bed. The single cup of coffee. The silent apartment. The fear. The grief. I remembered wondering whether I had made the biggest mistake of my life. I remembered missing Daniel so much that I sometimes had to stop myself from calling. I remembered the first time I laughed alone. The first time I bought something without considering whether he would like it. The first time I traveled without him. The first time I realized I could build a life that didn't revolve around another person. Those moments had seemed insignificant at the time. Now I understood they had been the foundation of everything. I hadn't walked away to punish Daniel. I had walked away to hear myself. And once I heard myself, I couldn't unhear what I needed. Daniel looked at me. "What did you learn about yourself?" I smiled. "A lot." "Tell me." I thought. "I learned that I avoid conflict." He nodded. "Yes." "I learned that I sometimes expect people to know what I need without telling them." "Yes." "I learned that I use silence when I'm hurt." He smiled faintly. "You've gotten much better." "I know." I continued. "I learned that I can love someone deeply and still leave them." He became quiet. "That was probably the biggest lesson." "Why?" "Because I used to think leaving meant the love wasn't real." He looked at me. "And now?" "Now I know sometimes you leave because you love yourself enough to stop accepting what hurts you." He nodded. "And I learned something else." "What?" "Being independent doesn't mean refusing to need anyone." I looked at him. "It means knowing you can stand without them." He smiled. "That's a good lesson." "It's an important one." I turned toward him. "What did you learn?" He thought for a long time. "I learned that loneliness isn't an excuse." I nodded. "I learned that feeling insecure doesn't give me permission to seek validation from someone else." "Good." "I learned that work can become an escape." "Yes." "I learned that silence can be dishonest." "Very true." He looked at me. "I learned that if I have a problem with the person I love, the solution isn't to find someone who doesn't know the problem yet." I smiled. "That's probably the most important one." He laughed. "I also learned that being loved isn't the same as being understood." I looked at him. "Explain." "I thought, because you loved me, You automatically knew what I needed. I nodded. But you couldn't know what I wasn't telling you. Exactly. And I thought because I provided for you, you automatically understood that I loved you. I smiled. But I needed you to say it. Yes. We were both assuming. And assumptions nearly destroyed us. He nodded. The door opened behind us. Evelyn stepped outside. Are you two coming back in? Daniel smiled. In a minute. She nodded and went back inside. I looked at Daniel. She's changed too. Yes. Do you think people really change? He thought about it. Some do. How do you know? They stop explaining why they can't. I smiled. That's good. He continued. They start doing. I nodded. That was the simplest definition of growth I had ever heard. Not promising, doing, not explaining, changing, not asking for another chance, becoming someone worthy of one. When we returned inside, Evelyn handed me a small box. I looked at her. What's this? Open it. Inside was an old photograph. I stared at it. It was from our wedding. I was standing beside Daniel. Evelyn was behind us, smiling. I looked at her. Why are you giving me this? Because I found it recently. She paused. And because I want you to have it. I smiled. Thank you. She touched my hand. I was wrong about many things. I nodded. I know. I thought protecting my son meant keeping him from pain. Yes. I understand now that sometimes people need to face pain in order to grow. I smiled. That's true. She looked at Daniel. I wish I'd understood it sooner. Daniel smiled. Me too. Then Evelyn looked at both of us. I'm proud of you. I swallowed. Those words meant more than I expected. Not because I needed her approval. Because I knew how difficult it had been for her to accept that her son was responsible for his own choices. She had finally let him become an adult. That night, when we got home, I placed the photograph on our dresser. Daniel stood beside me. You still like that picture? Yes. You look beautiful. I laughed. I was 29. You were beautiful. And now? He smiled. More. I shook my head. Good answer. He laughed. I looked at the photograph again. The younger version of me was smiling. She looked certain. She thought love meant forever. She thought forever meant never leaving. She didn't know that forever is built one day at a time. She didn't know that people change. She didn't know that love could be both beautiful and painful. She didn't know that sometimes the person you marry will become someone you don't recognize. She didn't know that you might become someone they don't recognize either. But I didn't feel sorry for her. I felt tenderness. She had done the best she knew how. So had Daniel. And perhaps maturity was learning not to hate the younger versions of ourselves for what they didn't know. I turned toward Daniel. Do you know what I want? What? I want us to stop talking about the affair someday. He looked at me. Completely. Yes. Do you think that's possible? Not because we'll forget. I paused. Because it won't need to be the center of our story anymore. He nodded. I like that. Me too. We have a lot more story to write. I smiled. Exactly. He took my hand. And we went upstairs. Not because everything was perfect. Because nothing is. We were simply two people who had learned how fragile love could be. And because we knew that now, we were more careful with it. Not fearful. Careful. There is a difference. Fear makes you hold something tightly because you're afraid it will disappear. Care makes you hold something gently because you understand its value. I wanted to live with care, not fear. That was the woman I had become. If I could sit across from the woman I was 2 years ago, I wouldn't tell her what to do. I wouldn't tell her to stay. I wouldn't tell her to leave. I wouldn't tell her to forgive. I wouldn't tell her to forget. I wouldn't even tell her that everything would eventually be okay, because she wouldn't have believed me. She was sitting in a car outside her mother-in-law's house, staring at the steering wheel, trying to understand how the man she loved could be sitting inside beside another woman. She didn't need a prediction. She needed permission. Permission to feel what she felt. Permission to leave without explaining herself. Permission to cry. Permission to be angry. Permission to stop protecting everybody else's feelings. Most importantly, she needed permission to remember that her dignity was not something another person could give or take away. It belonged to her. I think about that woman often, not because I want to return to that night, because I want to remember what she taught me. She taught me that sometimes the quietest decision is the strongest. People often think strength has to look dramatic. A slammed door, a raised voice, a public confrontation, a speech that leaves everyone speechless. But I didn't do any of that. I stood up, I walked out, and I went home. That was all. Yet, that simple act changed my life. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't manipulation. It wasn't designed to make Daniel chase me. I didn't leave so he would finally understand my value. I left because I understood mine. That distinction matters. If you walk away hoping someone will chase you, you're still giving them control over your decision. If you walk away because you know what you can and cannot accept, the decision belongs to you. I learned that the hard way. There is something else I would tell her. Don't confuse patience with self-abandonment. I had always been proud of being patient. I thought patience was one of my greatest strengths. I could forgive. I could compromise. I could understand. I could wait. I could support. I could adjust. But eventually, I learned that patience without boundaries can become permission. Permission for someone to keep doing what hurts you. Permission for you to keep ignoring yourself. Permission for resentment to grow quietly. Healthy patience has limits. Healthy love has boundaries. Healthy commitment still requires self-respect. I wish I had understood that earlier. I would also tell her something about forgiveness. Forgiveness is not the same as access. You can forgive someone and still keep your distance. You can understand why someone hurt you without allowing them to hurt you again. You can release anger without reopening the door. And forgiveness doesn't have to happen immediately. Sometimes, your heart needs time to catch up with what your mind already knows. For me, forgiveness happened in stages. First, I stopped wishing pain on the people who had hurt me. Then I stopped replaying the situation every day. Then, I stopped comparing myself to Vanessa. Then I stopped needing Evelyn to prove that she was sorry. Then, I forgave Daniel. But even after forgiveness, trust still had to be rebuilt. That was important. Forgiveness closed one wound. Trust required new behavior. I would tell her not to confuse an apology with change. An apology can be sincere. It can be emotional. It can be beautiful. But an apology is a beginning, not the destination. Daniel said, sorry many times. The words mattered. But eventually, the words had to become behavior. He had to become more transparent, more emotionally available, more accountable, more willing to have difficult conversations. He had to learn to tolerate discomfort without escaping. And I had to do the same. That was the part nobody could do for us. Not Evelyn, not Rachel, not a therapist, not time. We had to change ourselves. I would tell that younger version of me that she wasn't stupid for loving Daniel. She wasn't weak for missing him. She wasn't foolish for wanting the marriage to work. She wasn't naive because she hadn't known. People sometimes look back at betrayed spouses and ask, how didn't you know? As if love comes with a built-in lie detector. It doesn't. When you love someone, you naturally interpret their behavior through the lens of trust. That isn't stupidity. That's what trust means. The problem isn't trusting someone. The problem is continuing to trust them after their behavior repeatedly proves that trust is no longer safe. I eventually learned the difference. I would tell her not to compare herself to the other woman. That was one of my hardest battles. I wondered whether Vanessa was prettier, smarter, more exciting, more affectionate, more interesting. Maybe she laughed at Daniel's jokes more. Maybe she admired him in ways I had stopped doing. Maybe she made him feel young. Maybe she made him feel successful. Maybe she gave him something I couldn't. Those thoughts haunted me. But eventually, I understood something. Another person's willingness to betray doesn't measure your worth. Vanessa didn't become valuable because Daniel chose her. And I didn't become less valuable because he did. People make choices for reasons that often have more to do with themselves than the person they choose. I couldn't compete with something that wasn't a competition. I didn't need to become more like her. I needed to become more like myself. I would tell her something about marriage too. Don't assume that because you love someone, they automatically know how to love you. Love is not instinctive in every situation. People bring their childhoods into relationships, their fears, their insecurities, their communication styles, their wounds, their ideas about money, their ideas about intimacy, their ideas about conflict, their parents' marriages, their previous relationships, their expectations. Sometimes two people love each other deeply and still hurt each other because they don't know how to communicate that love effectively. That doesn't excuse betrayal, but it explains why emotional education matters. We spend years learning how to earn money, how to drive, how to build careers, how to manage businesses. But many of us enter marriage without ever learning how to have difficult conversations. We expect love to teach us. Sometimes it does. Sometimes it teaches us through pain. I wish more people learned before the pain. I would tell her that emotional safety matters. A relationship should be a place where you can say, I'm unhappy, without being punished. Where you can say, I need more, without being called demanding. Where you can say, I'm scared. Without being mocked, where you can say, I don't understand. Without being dismissed, where you can say, I made a mistake. Without fearing that your partner will use it against you forever. Daniel and I had to learn this. We had spent years trying to avoid uncomfortable conversations. We thought avoiding conflict protected our marriage. It didn't. It only made the distance invisible. And if I could tell that woman one final thing, I would say this: you don't have to decide your entire future in one night. That was perhaps the biggest lesson. That night, I thought I had to know everything. Was the marriage over? Would I divorce him? Would he change? Would I ever trust him? Would I ever love again? I didn't know. And I didn't need to. All I needed to know was what I would do that night. So, I walked away. The next morning, I only needed to decide what I would do that morning. Then the next day. Then the next. Sometimes healing becomes overwhelming because we try to solve the rest of our lives while standing in the middle of one painful moment. You don't have to. Sometimes, the next right step is enough. 2 years after that birthday, I was sitting in my kitchen with Daniel when he asked me something unexpected. Are you happy? I looked at him. Yes. He smiled. Really? Yes? He nodded. Then he asked, are you happy because of me? I thought about it. No. His face fell slightly. I smiled. Not only because of you. He looked at me. I'm happy because I know who I am now. He smiled. And you're part of that. I took his hand. But you're not responsible for it. He nodded. I like that. So do I. We sat quietly. The afternoon sunlight came through the window. Nothing dramatic was happening. No revelation, no crisis, no grand romantic gesture. Just two people sitting in a kitchen. And somehow, that ordinary moment felt more meaningful than all the grand promises we had made when we were younger. Because now we knew what ordinary love required. Attention, respect, curiosity, honesty, humility, choice. Later that evening, I walked to the bedroom. I opened the drawer beside the bed. The photograph from the birthday was still there. I held it for a moment. Then I placed it beside the wedding photograph. 2 pictures. 2 versions of my life. One represented innocence. The other represented the moment that innocence ended. But neither one represented the whole story. The whole story was everything in between. The arguments, the laughter, the mistakes, the silence, the betrayal, the separation, the therapy, the conversations, the forgiveness, the rebuilding, the ordinary mornings, the difficult evenings, the choice to try again, the choice to keep trying. That was the story. Not one moment, not one mistake, not one person. A life. I put the photographs away. Then I walked toward the window. Outside, the neighborhood was quiet. A woman across the street was bringing groceries inside. A man was walking his dog. Someone was watering plants. A child was riding a bicycle. Ordinary life. The kind of life I had once overlooked because I was always waiting for something important to happen. Now I understood. Life is mostly ordinary moments. And if you don't learn how to be present for them, you can spend years waiting for happiness while happiness is quietly happening around you. I smiled. Daniel walked up behind me. What are you looking at? Life. He laughed. That's deep. I turned around. I've become philosophical. Clearly. He kissed my forehead, then asked, ready for bed? Yes. We walked upstairs. He turned off the lights. I got into bed. He reached for my hand. I held it. And before I closed my eyes, I thought about the woman who had walked away. I was grateful for her. Not because she saved my marriage, because she saved me. She taught me that dignity isn't loud, that boundaries aren't cruelty, that leaving isn't always failure, that forgiveness isn't forgetting, that love isn't possession, that trust must be earned, that communication is a form of care, that people can change, but only when they choose to. And that sometimes the greatest love story isn't about finding someone who will never hurt you. It's about becoming someone who knows what to do when life hurts. Someone who can walk away when necessary. Someone who can return without losing herself. Someone who can love deeply without surrendering her identity. Someone who can say, I choose you, without secretly meaning, I cannot survive without you. That was the woman I had become. And if there was one lesson I would carry for the rest of my life, it was this. Never make yourself smaller to keep someone beside you. The people who truly belong in your life should not require your disappearance as the price of their love. I learned that at 65 birthday candles. I learned it in a quiet hallway. I learned it in an empty apartment. I learned it across therapy rooms and coffee shop tables. I learned it through tears, through silence, through forgiveness, through starting over, and finally, through choosing again. Not because I had forgotten what happened, but because I remembered who I was. I closed my eyes. Daniel squeezed my hand. Good night. Good night. The room became quiet. And this time, the silence didn't frighten me. It felt peaceful, because I no longer needed silence to hide anything. We had learned how to speak. We had learned how to listen. And after everything we had lost, we had finally learned how to love each other without losing ourselves. Before we end Claire and Daniel's story, I want to ask you one final question. If you were Claire, and you walked into your mother-in-law's 65th birthday celebration only to find your husband's mistress seated beside him, would you have quietly walked away like Claire did? And after everything that followed, the confession, the separation, the therapy, the accountability, and the slow rebuilding of trust, would you have given Daniel a second chance? Or would that betrayal have ended the marriage for you forever? Tell me in the comments, forgive or walk away, and tell me why. There is no perfect answer, because sometimes love isn't about choosing the easiest path. It's about knowing which choice allows you to keep your dignity without losing yourself. If Claire's journey touched you, please like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear its message, and subscribe to Love Stories by Mr. Johnson for more powerful American love stories about marriage, betrayal, healing, second chances, and the lessons relationships teach us. And remember this, never make yourself smaller just to convince someone to keep choosing you. Real love should make room for your voice, your boundaries, your dignity, and the person you are becoming. Thank you for staying with Claire until the very end. I'll see you in the next story.